When a blizzard buried the road above Stanley, Idaho, Claire Whitaker found a half-frozen stranger beyond her canine refuge fence and pulled him into the light before the mountain could take him. He left when the road opened, still searching for the German shepherd he had lost after war. But when heavy snow returned, so did he, riding back with Ranger at his side and a silence in his chest that only love, work, and mercy could thaw. Heavy snow came down over the Sawtooth Valley before dusk. Soft at first, then hard and slanting until the fence posts around Whitaker Canine Refuge looked like dark stitches in a white blanket. Claire Whitaker was outside the West Kennel Run with a feed bucket pressed against her hip, counting old working dogs by habit rather than by sight. Echo, the retired tracking hound, had already curled on his heated mat. Molly, who had once found lost hikers and now preferred to steal gloves, was pretending not to hear Claire call her name. Two elderly shepherd mixes stood in the doorway of the warm room, noses lifted, reading the weather with more honesty than any forecast. Claire knew that look. Dogs did not discuss storms, they voted with their feet. She latched the run, tugged twice, and tied a strip of blue cord around the repaired hook the way she had done since her father died. Frank Whitaker had kept lists in pencil. Claire kept proof in blue knots. A knot on a latch meant that one more thing had held. One more small promise had not broken. The sky lowered until the pine ridge disappeared and the whole valley seemed to breathe through wool. Claire turned toward the barn boots sinking past the crust and told herself not to look at the house window. Of course she looked. The kitchen lamp was on. Her father's chair sat just beyond the table, angled toward the stove, as if he had stepped out to check a gate and would come back complaining that the coffee had gone shy. He had been gone since October, but the chair still knew his shape better than the room knew his absence. Claire had not moved it. She had not moved his mug either. There were people in Stanley who called that grief. Ruth Bell from the diner called it stubbornness with a black ribbon tied around it. Claire called it none of their business and fed the dogs on time. The refuge had 7 dogs in residence, 2 old horses, a roof that needed attention, a tax bill folded under a flour tin, and a pump that made a new sound every time the temperature dropped below 10. It also had one woman who understood winter better than sleep. That had to be enough. She carried warm mash to the horse stall, checked the water heater, brushed snow from the hinges, and was reaching for the barn lantern when a sound came from beyond the north fence. A horse. Not the soft blow of one of her old mares. This was sharper, strained, and wrong enough to stop every dog in the kennel at once. Claire stood still. Snow tapped against her hood. The horse cried again, and the sound cut through the storm like a hand on glass. No rider with sense should have been on the upper road after noon. No horse would come to a strange fence in a blizzard unless the world behind it had become worse than the world ahead. Claire hung the feed bucket on a nail, took the lantern, looped a coil of rescue rope over her shoulder, and pushed open the barn door. The wind found her face immediately. It carried ice fine as ground salt and drove it under her scarf. She lowered her head and followed the fence line by touch, left glove sliding along the top rail. The refuge dogs erupted behind her, not frantic now, but urgent. Every bark aimed at the same dark place beyond the cottonwoods. At the far gate, the lantern showed a dun horse standing with its head low, reins trailing stiff in the snow. The animal trembled, but it had not bolted. That told Claire almost as much as the man hanging crooked beside the saddle. He was caught half on, half off one boot, still trapped, his body held there by luck leather and the patience of a horse that deserved better than this night. Claire did not run. Running frightened animals, running wasted breath. She spoke low as she came closer, not because the horse understood words, but because tone could travel where sense could not. "Easy now. Easy, sweetheart. You found the right fence. The horse rolled one eye toward her, then held. Claire reached the rider and touched the side of his neck with 2 fingers inside the collar, where wind had not stolen all warmth. A pulse answered. Weak, there. She closed her eyes for 1/2 second, just long enough to thank God without making a performance of it, then opened them and worked. He was a big man, too heavy for her to lift, and the storm was doing what storms do best, making every simple thing complicated. His left shoulder sat wrong beneath the coat. One leg had taken a hard scrape or blow, the fabric stiff and dark near the thigh, but Claire refused to let her mind build a picture bigger than the task. She had learned that from her father. Do not stare at trouble. Give your hands a job. She tied the rope around the man in a chest harness, passed it over the saddle horn to take some of his weight, and eased the trapped boot free inch by inch. The horse shifted once. Claire froze, let the animal settle, then continued. When the man slid down, he did not fall. He came to the snow like a felled post, guided by both hands. Claire spread a folded tarp and an empty feed sack beneath him, then made the slowest trip of her life back toward the house. The dogs barked until she reached the porch. Then, as if some old kennel rule had been called, they quieted. The storm filled the silence. Claire dragged the stranger over the threshold, shut the door with her hip, and stood panting in the sudden orange light of the kitchen. Snow fell from her sleeves. The man lay on the floor beside the stove, face pale under a dark beard, lashes iced. One hand closed around. Nothing. He looked older than 30 and younger than death. Claire did not like that thought. She replaced it with work. Boots off, wet coat off, knife through the frozen outer layer where buttons would take too long, blankets from the trunk, water on the stove not boiling against skin, just warm enough to coax life without shocking it. She spoke to him while she worked because her father had spoken to every injured creature they ever brought inside, including a red-tailed hawk that would have bitten him if it could. You are at Whitaker Canine Refuge, she said. I am Claire. You are going to be rude and live after making me haul you through a gate in this weather. That is the agreement. The stranger did not answer. His breathing hitched once, then found a shallow rhythm. She checked the injury on his leg without lingering over what she saw cleaned around it, wrapped it firmly, and covered him again. The shoulder she left supported and still. She knew enough to know what she did not know. That had saved more animals than Pride ever had. She found dog tags in an inner pocket when she searched for identification. Nathan Cole. The metal was warm from his body by then. Behind a cloudy plastic sleeve was a worn photograph of a German shepherd with a sable coat, ears high, eyes fixed on whoever had held the camera. On the back, in block letters faded by handling, someone had written, Ranger. Claire looked from the picture to the man on her floor. There was a story there, but the storm had no patience for stories. She tucked the photograph back where she found it and went outside again for the horse. The dun stood under the porch overhang now, sides heaving, less snow gathering in its mane. Claire led it to the barn, rubbed it down enough to keep the chill from settling deeper, checked legs and hooves, and gave it hay. You brought him here, she told the horse. That makes you the smartest one of us tonight. The horse blew into the hay as if accepting the compliment without getting sentimental. When Claire returned to the house, the stranger had shifted. One hand had moved toward his pocket. She knelt beside him. His eyes opened. They were gray-blue and unfocused, but fear crossed them fast, the kind that had already learned the room before the mind arrived. He tried to rise. Claire put a hand near his good shoulder, not on it, giving warning before contact. Stay down. You are safe. The word safe did not seem to reach him. His gaze swept the ceiling, the stove, the door, the window, and then fixed on the pocket where the photograph had been. His lips moved. Claire leaned closer. Ranger, he whispered. It was not a question, it was a wound shaped like a name. She answered carefully. I saw the picture. He is not here. The man's eyes closed, but not in peace, more like a door shutting against weather. Claire sat back on her heels and felt the house settle around them. Frank's chair faced the stove, the mug sat on the shelf, the dogs murmured in the kennel building beyond the yard. For the first time since her father died, a man's breathing filled the kitchen at night, and it did not belong to a memory. She should have been afraid. A woman, alone, had to think of such things, and Claire was not foolish. She set the old shotgun, unloaded but visible, near the pantry door, locked the front latch, and kept her phone beside her, though the screen showed no service. Then she pulled a quilt over the stranger's feet and set a pan under his wet coat where it dripped. The dogs outside stayed restless, not wild, listening. Claire made broth because broth gave a person something to do between worries. She checked Nathan's breathing every few minutes, changed the warm stones wrapped in towels, and wrote his name on the pad beside the stove with the time she had found him. Details mattered. In bad weather, details could be the difference between a rescue and a regret. Near midnight, the wind shifted. It hit the west wall, rolled over the roof, and came down the chimney with a low moan that made Nathan's eyes snap open. He did not shout. Somehow that was worse. His whole body tightened, as if the kitchen had turned into someplace else. Claire held still. "Nathan," she said low and steady. "Stove, table, snow outside. You are at Whitaker Canine Refuge." He stared at her but did not seem to see her fully. She remembered how one of the retired dogs, a black lab named Mercy, panicked at the clatter of dropped pans. Frank had taught Claire to give the animal a map back to the room. Name the true things. Do not argue with the fear. So Claire named what was true. There is coffee on the shelf. There are 2 old horses in the barn. The dogs are annoyed because I will not let them in the kitchen. I am annoyed because you picked a terrible night for visiting. A flicker crossed his face. It might have been confusion. It might have been the ghost of humor trying to remember its way home. His hand loosened. He swallowed. "Ranger," he said again, softer. Claire did not promise what she could not give. "We will talk about Ranger when you can stay awake longer than a match flame. For now, breathe." He did. Not well, but enough. She stayed beside him until his eyes closed. Snow pressed against the windows and erased the world beyond the porch. The refuge felt small under it, a handful of yellow light cupped in a valley that had forgotten mercy was supposed to be easy. Claire rose to add wood to the stove, and as she crossed the room, her fingers brushed the back of Frank's chair. She almost said, "I know, Dad." She did not. The dead did not need her to narrate. The living needed her to work. Before dawn, a new sound threaded through the blizzard. Not the horse this time, not the wind. The dogs in the kennel woke together, one low note rising into many, not barking at the house, but toward the dark timber above the north fence. Claire took the lantern and lifted the curtain from the kitchen window. At first she saw only snow, thick and white, pouring through the beam of the yard light. Then something moved beyond the last post, a shadow. Low, careful, gone before she could decide its shape. Behind her, Nathan stirred and whispered the name a 3rd time. Claire stood with her hand on the curtain, the kitchen warm at her back, and the whole mountain breathing cold beyond the glass, and understood that the stranger she had pulled from the storm had not arrived alone after all. The storm held the valley for 3 days, pressing snow against the house until the lower window panes turned white and the porch steps vanished into one smooth drift. Morning did not arrive so much as thinned the darkness. Claire measured time by chores, not clocks. Check Nathan's breathing, add wood, warm broth, swap damp towels, cross the rope line to the barn, break ice from the trough, feed the horses, count the dogs, come back with snow packed in the seams of her coat. The world outside had lost its edges. The kennel building was only 28 steps from the kitchen door, but in that weather it became a country of its own. Claire tied a rope from porch rail to barn hook
and another from barn hook to the kennel latch, the same way Frank had taught her after a storm years earlier swallowed a neighbor's shed and nearly his common sense with it. She moved with her head down and one gloved hand always on the line. Every time she reached the kennel,
The dogs greeted her with insulted dignity, as if she personally had ordered the blizzard and should apologize for the service. Molly stole a mitten from her pocket. Echo refused breakfast until Claire warmed it properly. The old shepherd mix named Pearl leaned against Claire's leg with enough weight to make a point about drafts. Claire scratched Pearl's ears and tied a blue cord around the new strip of burlap she tacked along the bottom of the door. One more thing holding. One more proof. In the kitchen, Nathan Cole slept like a man who did not trust sleep. Even unconscious, he kept his right hand near the pocket where the photograph had been. When the wind hit the roof hard, his fingers tightened. When the stove popped, his breath changed. Claire noticed these things because animals had trained her to notice without staring. Staring made fear feel cornered. So she moved quietly, letting sounds announce themselves before she made them: kettle cup, spoon, chair. She talked to the room when she had to do something near him. I am changing the bandage now. I am moving the blanket. This is the coffee pot making that rude noise, not the end of the world. It helped sometimes. Other times nothing helped except waiting. By the second afternoon, his feverish confusion had eased enough for him to hold a cup with his good hand. He drank broth in small, careful sips, eyes fixed on the door, and then on the window, and then on the corner where the unloaded shotgun stood. He understood the message without Claire explaining it. That earned him 1 mark in his favor. Not gratitude, not trust. A mark. You are Claire, he said, voice rough. That is what I have been claiming. Whitaker Canine Refuge. You said that. I did. He looked toward the muffled barking outside, and something like pain moved across his face before he hit it. Dogs. Retired working dogs. Some search and rescue, some police. One who may have been a professional sandwich thief in a former life. His mouth moved like it wanted to smile, but had forgotten the procedure. How many? 7. 2 horses. 1 unpleasant pump. A chair I keep meaning not to talk to. His gaze shifted to Frank's empty chair. He did not ask. Claire appreciated that so much she gave him another half cup of broth. He told her his name, though she already knew it from the tags, and he told her he was 38. Only because she asked for the medical notes she kept beside the stove. Former Navy, he said. Claire waited. He looked at the window. SEAL teams, retired, if that was the word for leaving before the service finished leaving you. The sentence was plain, but it cost him. Claire could hear the cost in the way he set the cup down exactly in the ring it had already made on the table. My father used to say retired working dogs never retire from noticing, she said. Maybe people are the same. Nathan looked at her, then really looked, as if she had opened a door without touching the handle. He did not walk through it. He only nodded once. That was enough for the second afternoon. Later, while she checked the support around his shoulder, he asked about the photograph. Ranger, she said. You said his name in your sleep. Not just in my sleep. No, not just there. The stove hissed as a damp log caught. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. Ranger was my canine during my last year's inn. German Shepherd. Search work, patrol, explosives. Too smart for most of us, and aware of it. After I left the teams, he was transferred twice. Then I heard he had been retired out through a contractor after a handler got sick. Paperwork went thin. Dogs disappear when paperwork goes thin. Claire knew that too well. She had seen old working dogs arrive with medals in their history and mats worn through under their elbows, praised by institutions that forgot to budget for old age. You were looking for him. I had a lead in Chalice, then another near Stanley. He stopped. His jaw worked once. I should have found him sooner. Claire tightened the sling knot, gentle but firm. Should have is a hungry word. It eats everything you feed it. That sounded like someone else's wisdom, my father's, she admitted. I steal from the dead because they cannot argue. That time Nathan did smile, very small and very tired. It changed his face less by making it happy than by making it human. The storm deepened that night. Snow blew under the porch roof and packed itself into the corners of the door. The phone stayed useless. The radio gave only bursts of static and one cheerful announcement from Boise that sounded like it belonged to a different planet. Claire moved Nathan from the floor to the old daybed near the stove once he could help with his good arm. He hated being helped. He did not say so. His body said it for him, stiff with the particular embarrassment of capable people made dependent by weather and bone. Claire did not fuss. Fussing was just pride wearing an apron. She gave instructions as if he were part of the chore list. Feet there, hand on the chair. Wait before you stand. If you pass out, I will be annoyed, and one of us should avoid making my day worse. He obeyed mostly. When he was settled, pale but upright, Molly the mitten thief started barking from the kennel in a pattern Claire did not like. Not alarm, not boredom. Report. She put on her coat. Nathan tried to swing his legs down. Absolutely not, she said. The words came out so much like Frank that it startled her. Nathan paused. I can help. You can sit there and keep bleeding from becoming a hobby. I will handle the dogs. He looked toward the window. If it is Ranger, if it is, I will not scare him by sending a limping stranger into a whiteout. That landed. Nathan leaned back, helplessness flickering into anger, and then into shame so quickly Claire almost missed it. She softened her voice. I will look. She went out with the lantern and followed the rope to the kennel. The dogs were pressed toward the north side, noses high, tails stiff or tucked according to temperament. Claire opened the outer door only enough to step through. Snow stung her eyes. At the fence line, just past the last wash of lantern light, there were tracks already softening under new fall. Large paw prints. Not wolf. Not coyote. Dog-heavy, moving with purpose. The prints paced the outside of the fence, turned near the weak corner, then vanished into the timber. Claire crouched and held the lantern low. Something had been left near the post, a scrap of webbing strap frozen stiff with a bit of faded orange stitching. She picked it up and felt old training gear beneath her gloves. Inside, Nathan took the strap in his good hand and went utterly still. It was not dramatic. No gasp, no speech, just a man looking at a small, ruined thing while the storm did the shouting for him. Ranger wore orange on his search harness, he said. Claire waited. He folded the strap once, then again, as if sighs could make grief manageable. He is close. Maybe. His eyes rose to hers, and there was the dangerous part hope. Not the soft kind people put on cards. The sharp kind that could cut a person open if it broke. I have to go after him when the wind drops. Claire had expected that. She still disliked it. You can barely stand. I can ride. You can barely sit. He exhaled through his nose. It was almost a laugh, except nothing was funny enough yet. Ranger does not come to everyone. Then he came to my fence. That means something too. The word sat between them beside the stove. Nathan looked away first. Claire did not celebrate the tiny victory because it was not a victory over him. It was a victory over panic, and those had to be handled respectfully. On the third morning, the snow eased. The house felt larger at once, as if the walls had been holding their breath. Claire opened the east curtain and saw the faintest blue breaking above the ridge. The drifts were high, rounded, deceptive. A pretty road in winter was often the most dangerous lie. Nathan tested his weight while she pretended not to watch. His shoulder was useless for real work, his legs stiff, his face gray with effort, but he stayed upright. That told her the argument was coming. She made coffee before it arrived. The coffee tasted like burned hope, but it was hot. He drank it without complaint, which either meant he had known worse or had no sense left. "The upper road will not be clear," she said. "I know the timber will hide the tracks. I know. If you go today and fall off that horse, I am not dragging you twice." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Strict policy, very." He set the cup down. "Ranger is old enough for Colt to hurt him. If he is loose, he may be circling the place he knows. If someone kept him badly, he may not trust a house." Claire heard the careful language, may, if, someone. He was keeping the story safe, even from himself. She respected that. She also heard what he did not say. A dog who had served men should not have to spend his old age choosing between hunger and fear. She turned toward the window. "Snow tells more truth than wind. My father said that too." "Your father said a lot. He had the advantage of dying before anyone could correct him." Nathan looked at her, and this time the smile arrived a little easier. It vanished when the kennel dogs began to bark again. Claire and Nathan both turned. Not the north fence this time. The sound came from the barn. Claire reached for her coat. Nathan reached for the edge of the daybed and pushed himself up before she could stop him. The two of them made it to the porch, Claire with the lantern, Nathan with one hand braced against the wall and stubbornness doing the rest. Beyond the barn, on the slope where the storm had combed the snow thin, a line of paw prints crossed the open ground. Beside them, for 5 clear steps before the new snow blurred them, were boot tracks. Claire felt the cold slide beneath her collar. Nathan saw them too. His whole body changed, not into a warrior ready for a fight, but into a man who had found a question bigger than weather. Someone else had been near the refuge in the storm. Close enough for Ranger to circle, close enough to know the weak corner of the fence. The wind moved over the drifts and softened the evidence even as they watched. Nathan whispered the dog's name, but this time it sounded less like grief and more like a vow. By the 4th morning, the blizzard had spent its anger and left behind the sort of beauty that made careless people do foolish things. The Sawtooth Ridge shone white under a pale blue sky, every pine limb lifted with snow, every ditch smoothed over, every danger dressed for church. Claire stood on the porch with coffee cooling in her hand and distrusted all of it. Pretty snow hid broken rails. Pretty snow hid holes beside the creek. Pretty snow made men with unfinished healing think the world had forgiven them enough to ride. Nathan Cole was already in the barn, moving slowly around the dun horse with one arm tucked close and the other doing the work of 2. Claire had told him the road might look open before it was. He had said he knew. Men often said they knew when what they meant was that knowing would not change them. Still, he did not move like a reckless man. He checked the horse with care, rubbed warmth into its neck, tightened the cinch in stages, and rested when his breath told on him. Claire watched from the barn door without offering help. She had learned overnight that help given too quickly could feel like a hand over the mouth. The horse, whom Nathan called Juniper, after reading the name burned faintly into the saddle strap, accepted him with the weary patience of an animal that had already brought one human through a storm and was not impressed by the species. Claire liked the horse for that. The refuge dogs barked from the kennel brighter now that the wind had stopped. Pearl wagged at Nathan when he passed, then sneezed into the snow as if giving a formal opinion. Nathan paused to look at the weak northwest corner of the kennel yard. The temporary brace he had made with one hand had held through the storm, but it leaned like an old man pretending his knees did not hurt. "That corner needs more than a strip of metal," he said. Claire folded her arms. "I noticed." "I figured you had." He looked toward the timber above the north fence where the tracks had vanished. Ranger had been close. The torn orange webbing lay in Nathan's coat pocket now, folded small, handled only when he thought she was not watching. The boot prints bothered him almost as much as the paw prints. They bothered Claire, too. In the mountains, the presence of another person after a storm could mean a neighbor, a lost hunter, a rescuer, a fool, or trouble wearing any of those coats. Deputy Owen Marks had not been reachable by phone yet. The radio had given Claire half a weather report and one hymn station from somewhere beyond the valley. Nothing else. Nathan checked the rifle scabbard on Juniper's saddle, and then, after a glance at Claire, removed the rifle and leaned it inside the barn door. "I do not need that to look for a dog," he said. Claire understood what he was really saying. He would not bring that kind of fear onto her land unless it became necessary. The mark in his favor grew larger. She gave him a small sack with bread jerky, 2 apples, a thermos, and a roll of bandage. He accepted all but the bandage. She held it out until he took that too. "If you reopen anything because you are trying to be noble," she said, "I will tell Ruth Bell, and she will make you eat soup while discussing your character." Nathan tucked the bandage into the saddlebag. "That sounds severe. She once made the mayor apologize to a pie." He looked at her, trying to decide whether that was true. Claire let him wonder. Snow dripped from the barn roof in slow, bright beads. The whole refuge smelled of wet wood, hay, dog bedding, and coffee. Nathan's gaze moved over the place: the kennel building with its patched door, the barn with the sagging gutter, the house where Frank's chair faced the stove, the blue cords tied like little flags of defiance on every repair Claire had managed alone. He saw too much. Claire knew that about him now. Some people noticed what they wanted. Nathan noticed what could fail. That was a gift until it became a prison. He stopped beside Frank's workbench and reached toward an auger, then pulled his hand back. "May I?" Claire looked at the tool. Her father had kept it sharp, oiled, and in the exact wrong place for anyone else's convenience. For a second she wanted to say no, simply because saying yes felt like moving something that had not agreed to be moved. Then she thought of the north brace and the dogs sleeping behind it. Yes. Nathan took the auger, bored a cleaner hole through the temporary support, and drove in a wooden peg he had shaved from scrap cedar the night before while pretending to rest. The repair was not permanent. It was better than before. When he finished, he put the auger back exactly where it had been. Claire saw that. She wished she had not. It made his leaving harder before he had gone. The upper road remained a broken white line between the pines. Nathan mounted slowly, his jaw tight only once when his shoulders shifted. Claire held Juniper's bridle until he was settled, then stepped back. "You should wait one more day," she said. "Probably." That was not an answer. It was the closest he would come to honesty without surrendering the decision. Ranger may not have one more day if someone has him moving. Claire thought of the shadow beyond the fence that strapped the boot prints. She hated that he was right. She hated more that rightness did not make him ready. "You find him," she said. "You come back through the lower road, not the ridge. Ridge is faster. Lower road is alive." Nathan looked down at her. The light caught the scar along his jaw. For the first time since she had pulled him into her kitchen, he seemed less like a stranger and more like a man standing at the edge of a choice he had practiced leaving all his life. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Claire narrowed her eyes. "Do not use manners as camouflage." That startled a laugh out of him. It was brief, rusty, and real enough to make Juniper flick an ear. Nathan gathered the reins. He did not say thank you in a grand way. He did not promise to visit. He only touched 2 fingers to the pocket where Ranger's photograph sat and said, "I owe you my life." Claire stepped away from the horse. "Then pay it by keeping it." That stopped him. The words had come from some place deeper than she meant to show. Nathan nodded once, and Juniper moved through the gate into the white road. Claire stood in the barnyard until horse and rider became smaller between the pines. Nathan never looked back. That should have made leaving clean. It did not. She went inside before the ridge took him from sight. The house was too quiet at once. Not peaceful. Empty in a way that had corners. The daybed blanket still held the shape of his shoulders. The cup he had used sat washed on the drain board because he had cleaned it himself before dawn. The stove snapped. Frank's chair remained angled toward the heat. Claire poured coffee and lifted a second mug without thinking and stopped with her hand in the cupboard. There had been no habit yet. Only 3 days. 3 days should not teach a room a new shape. She put the mug back. Then she took it out again, filled it, and poured the coffee into the sink, because stubbornness sometimes demanded a witness. Work came to save her, as it always did. She shoveled a path to the kennel, checked paws for packed snow, repaired a torn mat, measured feed, and counted the remaining bags, twice. Numbers did not improve when counted, but fear liked pretending they might. Ruth Bell arrived near noon in her old truck, which appeared at the end of the road with the determination of a sermon on wheels. She brought soup bread, a sack of potatoes, and the kind of eyes that found everything a person had not said. "Heard you had company," Ruth announced, stepping into the kitchen without waiting for permission. She knew she had. "Heard the storm had bad timing." Storms are famous for that. Ruth set the pot on the stove and looked at the daybed. "Is he dead now?" Ruth nodded. "Good. Dead men eat less but cause more paperwork." Claire took the bread because arguing with Ruth about food had never worked in the history of the valley. Ruth listened while Claire gave the practical version, found injured former Navy looking for a dog left when the weather lifted. She did not mention the way Nathan had whispered Ranger's name. She did not mention the second mug. Ruth, having known Claire since she was 13 and furious at anything that pitied her, noticed the omissions as clearly as spoken words. "A good dog will pull a man farther than pride can," Ruth said. "Sometimes a woman, too." Claire pretended to examine the soup. "If that is a proverb, it needs editing. It is soup wisdom. It comes thick." After Ruth left, Claire found that Nathan had done more than the visible repairs. The feed chest latch no longer needed lifting with a knee. The porch lantern hung straight. The loose shelf above the stove had a small wedge beneath it, just enough to stop the daily tilt that had annoyed her since November. Each fix saved seconds. Together they took up space. She tied blue cord on none of them. She told herself that was because she had not made the repairs. Near dusk, she changed her mind and tied a blue cord to the lantern hook anyway. The knot looked foolish and brave in the cold. That night the snow began again, slower than before, but thick enough to erase the day's tracks. Claire carried a lantern to the north fence and studied the place where the paw prints had been. Nothing remained except a shallow impression of movement under new white. She stood there longer than was useful. From the timber came a sound so low she felt it before she heard it. A single howl. Not wolf. Not the yipping talk of coyotes. A dog far off calling once and then choosing silence. The refuge dogs answered in broken voices, old bodies remembering work. Claire lifted the lantern, though the light could not reach the ridge. Ranger, she thought, and then wondered if thinking his name counted as a prayer. The next days hardened into winter routine. Nathan did not return. The phone worked in brief flashes enough for Deputy Owen to promise he would ask around about a sable German shepherd and a man with boot tracks near her fence, not enough for answers. Grant Voss sent his first letter through town mail, printed on thick paper with a resort company's logo at the top. He expressed concern about Claire's ability to maintain the property through severe weather and repeated his offer to purchase the refuge land. Claire folded the letter into a square so small it could fit under Frank's mug, then placed it there like a captured insect. She had no time for men who called hunger opportunity. By the end of the week corner Nathan had braced began to creak again under a crosswind. Claire cut a cedar pole, dragged it through knee-deep snow, and set it diagonally against the frame. The work was rough. It held. She tied a blue cord around the post with fingers too cold to feel the knot. In the kennel, Pearl watched her with cloudy eyes, unimpressed by human ceremony. Claire laughed despite herself. It came out small. It still counted. Before bed, she checked the kitchen window. Snow filled the yard, the barn roof, the path, the gate, the world. The daybed was folded back into a bench. Nathan's cup had returned to the shelf. Frank's chair faced the stove. Outside somewhere, beyond the timber, a man searched for an old dog in weather that did not care about promises. Claire touched the blue cord around her wrist. A scrap left over from the day's repair, and told herself not to hope for hoofbeats. Hope was hungry too. But when the wind shifted after midnight and carried a distant, lonely bark down the ridge, she was already awake, listening. January did not arrive at Whitaker Canine Refuge like a page on a calendar. It came as weight. It settled on the roof, on the fence rails, on the bags of feed stacked lower than Claire liked, on the pump that coughed before it gave water, and on the place behind Claire's ribs where she kept every number she did not want to say aloud. The valley froze hard enough that sound changed. A dropped bucket did not clatter, it cracked the morning. Dog nails on the kennel floor tapped with a hollow note. The old horses chewed hay with the seriousness of church elders deciding whether the world had lost discipline. Claire woke before dawn each day and listened first for wind, second for dogs, third for the pump. If all three answered, she got up. If one did not, she got up faster. Snow had piled against the west wall of the kennel building until the lower vents disappeared. Claire dug them clear, then covered the inside with burlap, hung low enough to block the worst draft, and high enough to let damp air escape. Frank had been fussy about that. Warm was not the same as sealed. Animals could survive cold better than trapped wet air. She heard his voice every time she left a gap. In her mind, he always sounded mildly irritated, which made missing him easier somehow. She moved the oldest dogs into the interior run, doubled bedding under Echo's hips, and learned which water bowls froze first, despite the heater. She recorded everything in a school notebook: temperature, feed, medicine, stiffness, mood, repairs. The notebook had no poetry in it. That was why she trusted it. A person could lie in a prayer if grief got loose. Numbers at least had the manners to stay blunt. Still, numbers did not feed dogs by themselves. By the second week of January, Claire cut the rations, carefully adding warm broth and rice where she could, taking less for herself without making a noble scene of it. Noble scenes wasted energy. She ate toast over the sink and called it supper. Ruth Bell caught her doing that on a Thursday and reacted as if Claire had insulted 3 generations of Bell women. "I brought stew," Ruth said, carrying a pot through the kitchen like a queen returning from war. "You are going to sit down and eat it with a spoon, not drink it while fixing a hinge." Claire looked at the hinge in her hand. "It is a very important hinge." "So was Pharaoh, and the Lord still had opinions." Ruth set the pot on the stove and began opening cupboards. Claire let her. Fighting Ruth required more calories than the stew provided. Ruth had been Frank's friend, which meant she had earned the right to enter with food and leave with truths. She did not mention Nathan until Claire had eaten half a bowl. "Any word from that Navyman?" Claire kept her eyes on the stew. "Deputy Owen is asking around." That was not the question. It is the answer available. Ruth snorted. A woman who runs a refuge ought to know the difference between missing and gone. Claire set the spoon down. "Ruth, I am not saying you should hang curtains in your heart for a man you knew 3 days. I am saying you keep listening toward the ridge." Claire hated that Ruth could see so much while pretending to examine soup thickness. "I listen for the dog." "Of course you do." Ruth patted her hand once, quick as a bird landing and leaving. "Sometimes God sends the dog first because the man would argue." After Ruth left, Claire stood at the sink with warm water on her hands and thought about Ranger. The dog had become a presence without being there. Stitched into the refuge by tracks, a scrap of orange strap, Nathan's voice, and the way every dog looked north when the wind came down from the timber. The valley held stories like snow in tree wells. Step wrong, and you disappeared into one. May Harper came the following Monday. Claire had seen the young woman's name on the volunteer form and expected someone who wanted photographs with heroic dogs, then discovered too late that old working animals smelled like medicine-wet coats and opinions. Instead, May arrived in a dented blue pickup parked badly and sat inside for 6 full minutes while the engine steamed. She was 24, narrow-shouldered inside a borrowed parka, with dark hair tucked under a knit cap and eyes that kept measuring exits. Claire watched from the kennel doorway and waited. Dogs taught patience with newcomers. People benefited from the same courtesy. May finally stepped out holding a bag of towels like an offering. "I am not scared," she called. Claire looked at Pearl, who looked back with cloudy skepticism. "That is good," Claire said. May swallowed. "I mean, I am, but I came anyway." "That is better." Inside the kennel, Molly barked once. May flinched so hard she nearly dropped the towels. Claire did not pretend not to notice. She also did not make it into a lesson. She gave May the quietest job first, folding clean bedding in the tack room where the dogs could be heard but not felt. By afternoon, May had learned the names of all 7 dogs and had been silently judged by each. She admitted she had grown up with a father who came home from deployments with storms inside him. He had never hurt her, she said quickly, as people do when they fear their truth might be misunderstood. He just left rooms without warning. He hated crowded places. He woke at night and stood in the hallway. "I used to think if I made less noise he would stay." Claire kept sorting medicine bottles. "That is a hard job for a child." May blinked at the shelf. "Nobody says it like that. They should." May came back the next day and the next. She remained afraid of the larger dogs, but fear changed shape when given chores. She carried water. She read labels. She learned that Echo liked being approached from the left because his right eye had clouded. She learned that Pearl pretended to dislike everyone and leaned only when no one was watching. Molly stole one of her socks and made her laugh for the first time on the property. Claire tied a blue cord to the tack room shelf May organized, and May touched the knot as if it were a medal. The refuge needed that laugh. It needed May's hands, too. Snow kept falling. The pump worsened. Claire wrapped exposed pipe in straw and canvas-banked snow around the housing and prayed in practical verbs: hold, thaw, start, last. Grant Voss's second letter came hand-delivered by a man in a clean truck with tires too new for humility. Grant expressed concern again, this time adding that county review boards could become involved when animal facilities appeared under-maintained during extreme weather. He mentioned liability. He mentioned property value. He mentioned that his offer would remain generous for a limited time. Claire read the letter at the kitchen table, while Ruth, who had arrived with biscuits, looked over her shoulder without shame. "Generous," Ruth said. "That man uses the word like a napkin." Claire folded the paper and slid it under Frank's mug with the first letter. The stack was growing. So were the bills. Veterinary supplies, feed, fuel, parts for the pump, a late tax notice with red ink and no imagination. Claire did not tell May about the worst of it, but May saw enough. Young people who had learned to read household weather could read silence, too. One evening, while they bedded the dogs, May asked what would happen if Grant bought the land. Claire shook out a blanket. He will not. But if he did, Claire laid the blanket over Echo, smoothing it along the old dog's side. Then these dogs would be scattered to places that may or may not understand them. Some would be fine, some would not. May looked at Molly, who was chewing a stolen glove with the serene confidence of a criminal beloved by the court. That cannot happen. Claire tied the blanket strap. Cannot is not a plan. The next morning, the northwest corner Nathan had braced groaned under a wind that had shifted while she slept. Snow blew across the open yard and hit the kennel wall with a steady, whispering force. Claire stood outside with a shovel and understood the shape of the problem. The wind came down the ridge, crossed the paddock, gathered speed over the hardpack, and drove straight into the dog's side of the building. Frank had talked for years about building a windbreak farther out, not against the wall but away from it, where moving air could stumble before reaching the kennel. There had always been another expense first. A pump, medicine, fencing, funeral bills. Claire measured the distance in paces through knee-deep snow. 27 feet from the kennel wall, the snow behaved differently. It dipped, curled, and settled in a low ridge. She marked the spot with a broken shovel handle and tied blue cord around it, though nothing had been fixed yet. Sometimes a knot had to mark intention. May watched from the doorway. Is that a repair? Not yet. Then what is it? Claire looked toward the white ridge where the storm had swallowed Nathan's trail weeks earlier. A place for the wind to lose an argument. May seemed to like that. She wrote it in the margin of the feed chart, which Claire pretended not to see. By late February, the refuge had become a machine made of tired hands and small mercies. Ruth brought food. Pastor Daniel Reeves came twice with firewood and never once said the kind of things that make help feel like debt. Deputy Owen stopped by when patrol allowed, checked the north road, and told Claire no confirmed sighting of Ranger had come in yet. He also warned her that Grant was asking questions at the county office. Owen had searched with Frank in the old days, before budgets got thin and volunteers got older. He stood in the kennel doorway with his hat in both hands and looked at the blue knots. Frank would have liked those, he said. Claire adjusted a feed scoop. He would have said they were wasteful and then used them himself. Owen smiled. Yes, ma'am. The smile faded. You call if Voss pushes harder. Claire nodded, though calling for help still felt like lifting a weight she had not trained for. That night the temperature fell so far the pump did not cough. It only clicked once and stayed silent. Claire worked by lantern with May holding tools, Ruth on the phone trying to find a part, and every dog in the kennel watching as if voting on her performance. They thawed the housing, slowly replaced a cracked fitting, and coaxed water back near midnight. No cheering, just relief, too tired to stand. Claire tied a blue cord around the new fitting, then another around May's wrist. You stayed, she said. May looked down at the knot and bit her lip. I almost did not. Most good things almost do not. The next morning, after a brief sleep that felt borrowed, Claire stepped outside to a world newly covered. Snow fell thick enough to soften the barn, the kennel, the truck, the debts, the whole stubborn refuge. She carried hay to the horses and stopped near the north gate. There, printed in the fresh white, were tracks. One set belonged to a horse coming down from the upper road. Beside it ran the large, steady prints of a dog, not wandering, not circling, coming straight toward Whitaker Canine Refuge, as if the mountain had finally decided to return what it had been holding. The tracks reached the north gate before the riders did. Claire stood in the falling snow with a hay fork in one hand and watched the white road above the refuge slowly give shape to a horse, then a man, then a dog moving at the horse's left shoulder with the steady economy of an animal who had learned not to waste strength. For one strange second, everything became quiet. The kennel dogs stopped barking between one breath and the next. The old horses lifted their heads.
Even the wind seemed to pause behind the pines, curious about what the mountain had returned. Nathan Cole rode the dun horse Claire remembered, though now the animal wore a better blanket and moved with less exhaustion. Nathan sat taller than he had any right to after the state he had left in, leaner in the face, darker from weather, his left arm moving but still careful. Snow had gathered on his hat brim and shoulders. He did not open the gate. That was the first thing Claire noticed, and against her will, respected.
He stopped outside it, reins loose, hands visible, waiting, the way a person waits at the edge of someone else's life. Beside the horse stood Ranger. The German shepherd was older than the photograph, broader through the chest, with sable fur shaded black along the back and gray at the muzzle. One ear held a small notch, his amber eyes fixed on Claire with an intelligence so direct it felt less like being looked at than being read. He did not wag, he did not bark. He stood in the snow with his tail low and his body angled between Nathan and the gate, as if protection was not a command he obeyed, but a language he still spoke. Claire's throat tightened. She had imagined this dog too many times during the long weeks of January. Imagination had made him half ghost, half promise. The real Ranger had snow caught in his whiskers and a burr in the fur behind his front leg. He looked tired. He looked alive. That was enough to unsteady her. Nathan touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat. Morning. Claire looked at the sky, which was still gray and busy dropping half of Idaho onto her land. Is it? He glanced up as though verifying. It is trying. The joke was so dry it took her a moment. Then she made the mistake of smiling. Ranger noticed. His ears shifted forward. Nathan saw that too. Claire lowered the hay fork, not because she trusted everything yet, but because no good conversation had ever begun with farm equipment held like a weapon. You found him. He found me first. Nathan's voice changed around the words, softening in a way that made Claire look away briefly to give him privacy. Ranger had been staying near an abandoned guide cabin above the old trail, he explained. A retired handler had taken him in after the paperwork broke, then passed during autumn. A neighbor had fed him for a while. After the neighbor left for Boise, Ranger began moving between empty places, too trained to become wild, too independent to walk into any door that opened. Nathan had spent weeks following reports that were always old by the time he arrived. A large shepherd seen near a creek, paw prints at a shed, a dog taking shelter under a broken porch but leaving before anyone could get close. He spoke without blaming anyone. Claire heard the effort in that. He had found Ranger 2 days earlier, after the dog circled him for an hour in the timber, refusing to come close until Nathan sat down in the snow and stopped calling. Ranger finally approached, sniffed his sleeve, then walked away. Nathan followed. That was how the reunion happened, apparently not with music, not with leaping joy, but with an old dog making a former seal prove he could be patient. Claire liked Ranger even more. What brought you back? She asked, though the supplies on the pack saddle had already begun answering. Behind Nathan, tied carefully and covered with canvas, were sacks of feed, coffee, salt, straw bales, compressed tight, a roll of weatherproof tarp, coils of rope, vet wrap, hinges, screws, lantern fuel, and a narrow wooden crate marked with the name of a veterinary supplier in Boise. Another horse, a sturdy bay mare with kind eyes and the build of a creature chosen for work rather than show, stood behind Juniper. Nathan rested one hand on the saddle horn. Road opened enough. I rode fast. That is not an answer. His eyes moved over the refuge, the half-buried kennel, the marked shovel handle 27 feet out, the blue cords, the patched pump, housing the smoke lifting thin from the house chimney. It looked worn. It did not look beaten. Claire saw him realize that. He had not come back to rescue a ruin. He had come back to a place still fighting. I remembered what needed doing, he said. Those were dangerous words. They could be kindness or debt or pride, and Claire did not take any of those unexamined. She walked to the gate, but did not open it.
Ranger watched her boots. Nathan continued before she could speak.
I brought supplies because I used yours. I paid the emergency order because you used medicine and time on me. The mare is not a gift unless you decide it is. Claire's eyebrows rose. That is the worst sales pitch I have heard. I am not selling her. That makes it worse. Nathan nodded once, as if he had expected the shot and respected the aim. Ranger sneezed. It sounded judgmental. Claire looked at him. Do not start with me. Ranger stared back, ancient and unimpressed. Nathan said, He does that when I am losing. Claire almost laughed, which annoyed her. She turned her attention to the bay mare. Good feet, strong hip, calm eye. Too good for a casual errand. Yours if you want her. No. All right. He said it too quickly. Claire narrowed her eyes. You rehearsed this, several versions. Did any involve me saying yes, not the realistic ones? Behind Claire, May had come out of the kennel building and stopped with both hands pressed to her coat. Ruth's truck was not in the yard, thank goodness. Ruth would have turned the whole thing into a town holiday and possibly charged admission in pie. May whispered, Is that Ranger? The dog looked at her. May froze. Ranger took one step, sniffed the air, then looked away with the contained disinterest of a judge postponing a verdict. May exhaled as if she had passed a test she did not understand. Claire faced Nathan again. I do not take charity, I remember, do you? His gaze met hers. Yes. The word had no defense in it. He looked tired now in a way travel alone did not explain. Weeks of searching had carved hollows beneath his eyes. His hand drifted once toward Ranger, not touching, just checking distance. Ranger leaned very slightly into the space between them, and Nathan's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Claire saw the invisible exchange. She could refuse supplies. She could refuse the mare. She could refuse a man. She could not refuse what the dog had already decided without admitting she trusted pride more than need. Nathan said, I need board for a while. Ranger, too. Juniper and the bay can cover part of it and work. Supplies cover what I owe from the storm. I work for meals, hay, and a place to sleep. When we are even, you tell me. Claire listened to the offer piece by piece. Work could be measured. Feed could be measured. Lodging could be measured. A debt turned into a ledger was less dangerous than gratitude floating loose around the heart. She looked at Ranger, who had sat down now with his back to the wind and his front paws precisely aligned. Snow gathered on his head. He did not care. What about him? Claire asked. Nathan's hand stilled. Ranger chooses whether to stay. He is not equipment. That answer opened something in her that she had been guarding for months. She lifted the gate latch. The sound was small, but every dog in the kennel answered as if a bell had rung. Nathan did not move until Claire pulled the gate inward and stepped aside. Juniper entered first, then the bay mare, then Ranger. The German shepherd paused just inside the fence and lowered his nose to the snow. He did not rush toward the kennel. He followed the inner line of the property, reading weeks of weather, animals' fear work, and old grief in layers no human could see. At the weak northwest corner he stopped. His hackles rose. He sniffed along the base, then pawed at the snow with deliberate strokes. Not frantic. Certain. Claire and Nathan came to him together without planning it. Beneath the drift, half hidden, was a gap where wire mesh had pulled from a post and been packed over by blown snow. A smaller dog might have squeezed through. A frightened dog might have tried. Claire felt shame heat her face despite the cold. I checked that. Nathan did not say what some men would have said. He knelt slowly, shoulder stiff, and examined the post. Snow buried the damage. Ranger did not. Ranger looked at Claire, then at Nathan, then sneezed again. May spoke from behind them. I think he is disappointed in management. Claire gave the young woman a look. May's eyes widened. Sorry. Nathan's mouth twitched. He does that too. The first hour after Nathan returned disappeared into work. Claire accepted the tarp because the kennel roof had begun dripping near Pearl's mat. She accepted the vet supplies because Echo's joints did not care about her principles. She accepted the feed because hunger had no manners. She did not accept the mare, not yet. Nathan did not press. That mattered. They settled Juniper and the bay in the barn where the old horses treated the newcomers with theatrical suspicion. Ranger inspected the kennel from outside the runs, stopping at each dog. Molly barked in his face. Ranger blinked once. Molly stopped, confused by the power of being ignored. Pearl leaned toward the gate, houseworking, and Ranger lowered his head until the two old dogs breathed the same air. Claire looked away. Some greetings were too private for narration. In the house, Nathan stood just inside the kitchen door and paused. Frank's chair was where it had been. The daybed was folded back. The mug shelf held one more clean cup than usual because Claire had never put the second one away after all. Nathan noticed because of course he did, and said nothing because he was learning. Ranger entered behind him, sniffed the threshold, then crossed the room to the stove and lay down in the exact place where Nathan had shivered weeks earlier. His body filled the floor like a verdict. Claire hung her coat. "House rules," she said. Nathan straightened a little. "Dogs do not get table scraps unless Ruth sneaks them. Tools go back where they came from. If you have a bad night, you say so before you walk into the storm." Nathan absorbed the third rule without looking at her. "That may take practice. Most useful things do." Ranger thumped his tail once, very softly. Nathan looked at the dog. "You stay out of this." Ranger closed his eyes. The joke landed in the room differently than before. Not as camouflage, as a small offering. That evening they made a ledger at the table. Claire wrote supplies, feed board, labor, horse, care, repairs. Nathan watched her add columns with the focus of a man who liked a mission when it came with lines. May sat across from Ranger on the floor, not touching him, just existing within his permission. Once Ranger lifted his head and placed Nathan's forgotten glove beside Claire's boot. Claire held it up. "Is this his habit?" Nathan sighed. "He returns things I leave behind by putting them where I will be most embarrassed." "Smart dog." Ruth arrived near dark because news in Stanley traveled faster than plowed roads when romance or livestock might be involved. She stood in the kitchen doorway, took in Nathan, Ranger, the supplies, May on the floor, Claire with a pencil and the second cup beside the stove. "Well," she said, "the Lord does enjoy bringing strays in pairs." Claire closed her eyes. Nathan murmured, "I assume I am one of the strays." Ruth looked him over. "We will see which one has better manners." Ranger lifted his head. Ruth pointed at him. "I was not talking to you, Sergeant." No one had told her Ranger had been a military working dog. She just had the tone for it. Ranger astonishingly wagged once. By nightfall, the storm thickened again. Not violent yet, patient. Snow covered the fresh tracks through the gate and softened the outlines of the supplies stacked under canvas. Nathan rolled his bed in the storage room off the kitchen, not the main house, not the barn, exactly where the ledger made sense. Ranger chose the threshold between storage room and kitchen, blocking both passage and argument. Claire stepped over him twice. The third time, he did not move. She looked down. "I run this refuge." Ranger's eyes remained closed. Nathan called from the storage room. "He knows! He is just auditing." Claire stood there in her own kitchen, snow pressing at the windows, debts under a mug, a former Navy SEAL in the next room, and an old German shepherd occupying the floor like he had been sent by heaven with poor manners. She should have felt crowded. Instead, the house felt dangerously less hollow. Outside, the northwest corner waited under snow. The windbreak waited in her mind 27 feet from the wall. The work was bigger than one person, and perhaps, though she was not ready to say it, no longer had to be. In the dark before sleep, Ranger rose without a sound and went to the back door. His body stiffened. Nathan appeared behind him, awake in an instant. Claire reached for the lantern. Beyond the yard, under the falling snow, something moved near the kennel corner Ranger had marked. Not a wolf, not a dog. A human shape, gone almost as soon as the light touched the storm. The human shape near the kennel vanished before Claire's lantern found anything more than disturbed snow and a dark line where the fence shadow cut across the ground. Nathan moved first, but not in the way Claire feared. He did not charge into the storm. He stepped to the side of the door, looked once at Ranger, once at Claire, and waited for the dog to read what human eyes could not. Ranger stood with his nose high, ears forward, body still, except for one slow breath that lifted the fur along his ribs. The old German shepherd did not bark. That made the night feel larger. Claire held the lantern low because Frank had taught her light above the eyes could blind the person carrying it. May, pale and wide-eyed behind them, whispered from the kitchen. "Should I call Deputy Owen?" "If the phone gives you anything," Claire said, "tell him we saw someone near the northwest fence. Tell him no one is hurt. Tell him Ranger is offended." May stared. "Should I include that, Nathan?" said quietly. "It may be the most accurate part." Claire almost smiled and hated the timing. Outside, snow fell thick, but not wildly. The kind that muffled sound and made the world seem innocent. Ranger moved first, stepping off the porch with the grave reluctance of an old officer called back to duty after supper. Nathan followed on Claire's left, slower than his instincts wanted, one hand near Ranger but not touching. Claire kept the lantern between them and the fence. At the weak corner, Ranger lowered his nose to the post he had uncovered earlier, then tracked along the inside line. Whoever had been there had not climbed in. A boot had pressed near the rail. A gloved hand had brushed snow from the latch. Claire saw nothing stolen, nothing broken beyond what winter had already damaged, but the intention of being there was enough to make her skin tighten. Nathan crouched with care, studying the marks. "Bigger boot than mine," he said. "Deep heel. Came from the road, not the timber." Claire thought of Grant Voss's clean truck, his letters, his concern printed on expensive paper. She did not say his name yet. Accusations needed stronger legs than suspicion. Deputy Owen arrived 40 minutes later in a county vehicle that sounded displeased about the road. He had known Frank had searched gullies and riverbanks with him, and still treated Claire like someone capable rather than someone fragile. That was why she opened the gate before he knocked. Owen listened, examined the fence, looked at Nathan and Ranger longer than politeness required, then took notes with gloved fingers. "Grant Voss has been asking whether the refuge has proper fencing," he said at last. "Asked me too. Asked the county office. Asked the wrong way if he wanted me fond of him." Claire folded her arms against the cold. "Asking is not trespassing. No, but asking creates a weather of its own." Owen looked toward the kennel building where old dogs shifted behind warm walls. "I will make a report. You keep lights on the north side if you can." Claire nearly laughed. With what money, Owen did not flinch. "I have 2 old motion lamps in my garage. They are ugly. Frank hated them." "Then they are probably free." He smiled. "Exactly." After he left, Nathan stood with Claire under the porch roof while Ranger shook snow onto both of their boots. Nathan watched the northwest corner as if memorizing the angles. "We can brace that in the morning." "More than brace." Claire pointed out into the yard toward the shovel handle marked with blue cord. "Wind comes down there. It hits the kennel, straight pile snow against the vents and hides the fence damage. My father wanted a break out there, not against the wall, away from it." Nathan followed her line with his eyes. 25 feet, 27. He looked at her. "That's specific. Snow is specific." Ranger sneezed once, which Claire chose to interpret as agreement. Morning came gray and hard, with the storm reduced to a fine powder that drifted sideways across the yard. Work began before breakfast, because shelter owners who waited for ideal conditions became former shelter owners. Claire, Nathan, and May hauled cottonwood poles from the stack behind the barn. Nathan favored his shoulder less than before, but Claire saw the cost in the pauses he took when he thought no one watched. He had a way of turning pain into inspection. If he needed a breath, he studied a knot in the wood. If his legs stiffened, he checked the line of the fence. Claire let him have that dignity until it became stupidity. Then she handed him coffee and said, "Drink before you become decorative." He accepted. May measured 27 feet from the kennel wall using a rope Claire had marked in knots. Ranger supervised by lying exactly where the first post hole needed to be. Nathan looked down at him. "Move." Ranger blinked slowly. May whispered, "Is he always like this?" Nathan sighed. "No, sometimes he is worse." Ranger thumped his tail without moving. Claire laughed, and the sound surprised all three humans. It did not belong to easy weather. It belonged to the kind of day that needed one foolish moment to keep from turning grim. They dug post holes as deep as the frozen ground allowed, tamped gravel-set poles, and stretched the first line of split willow between them. Nathan wanted the weave tight. Of course he did. His whole life had taught him that gaps let danger through. Claire wanted openings wide enough for wind to break apart, rather than pile its full weight behind the wall. She explained it with a shovel drawing in the Snow Ridge Yard kennel drift line place, where air slowed, place where snow dropped. Nathan listened without interrupting, but she could see the doubt in his shoulders. In his world, barriers stopped things. In hers, a barrier that stopped too much simply moved the problem to a worse place. "You are trying to make a fence that does not fence," he said. "I am trying to make wind tired." "That is not how wind works." Claire stuck the shovel into the snow. "That is exactly how wind works here." Nathan looked at Ranger. Ranger had closed his eyes. "Do not ask him," Claire said. "He lies on your side when you are wrong, just to make you learn slower." Nathan's mouth twitched. They compromised badly, which is how many useful things begin. The first section was tighter than Claire liked and more open than Nathan preferred. They would let snow judge. By noon, Ruth arrived with sandwiches, declared their line crooked, and then admitted crooked things sometimes survived because pride had fewer places to hold on. Pastor Daniel came behind her with 2 men from church and a thermos of coffee strong enough to qualify as equipment. Claire disliked needing the help. She also knew the posts would not rise without it. Pastor Daniel seemed to understand because he did not make a speech about community. He simply handed her a pair of work gloves and said, "Frank once told me the Lord sends help in forms that make us practice humility." Then he added, "I told him the Lord could send better gloves." Claire looked at the gloves. They were better than hers. She took them. The day unfolded into a rhythm: dig set, tamp weave, tie warm fingers, check dogs, repeat. Ranger moved between stations, never underfoot unless Nathan deserved it. May started the morning afraid to pass behind him and ended it carrying a water bucket while Ranger walked beside her as if she were part of his patrol. Once, when Molly barked sharply from inside, May froze. Ranger stopped too, looked back, then continued calmly. May followed his example before she realized she had done it. Claire saw, Nathan saw. Neither said anything, which made the moment more likely to stay. Near evening, Deputy Owen returned with the ugly motion lights. He and Nathan mounted one on the barn and one on the north corner of the kennel. Owen asked no questions about Nathan's service, beyond whether his shoulder could handle the latter. Nathan said yes. Claire said no. The latter went to Owen. Nathan accepted the decision with only one look at the sky, as if heaven might overrule her. It did not. While they worked, Owen told Claire quietly that Grant had filed a preliminary inquiry about animal safety and land use. Nothing formal yet, but formal like to follow men with money. Claire looked at the half-built windbreak, the patched kennel, the dogs who needed pills, warmth, patience, and a place that understood old habits. How long Owen tugged his hat lower. Hard to say. Weeks, maybe. He wants pressure more than process right now. Nathan heard enough to turn. Claire saw the old mission focus rise in him and put a hand on the fence rail before it could become action. This is not a raid. I know. His voice said he knew the words. His hand said knowledge had not reached them yet. Claire kept her tone level. Paperwork beats paperwork. Records beat rumors. Work beats photographs taken from the worst angle. Ranger leaned against Nathan's leg, then a small pressure, almost invisible. Nathan looked down, breathed once, and nodded. Work, he said. Good. Claire handed him a coil of wire. Start there. The first test came sooner than expected. That night, snow began after supper. Not a storm, exactly, more like the sky shaking flour over the valley. By dawn, 4 inches covered the yard. Claire stepped outside before the others woke and walked the line alone. The new windbreak had changed the snow, but not perfectly. Behind the tightest section, a crescent drift curled toward the kennel gate. The open portions had dropped snow farther out, leaving a clearer band near the wall. Claire planted blue-marked stakes at each change and stood studying them with cold biting through her socks. Nathan appeared with coffee and 2 mugs, Ranger at his side. He followed her gaze. The tight section caused that. Yes. He did not defend it. That surprised her. He walked the line crouched by the crescent, looked at the bare patch windward of the wall, then back at the kennel vents still clear behind the open section. In the teams, he said slowly, you learn to seal gaps. You learn that open space can be where trouble enters. Claire accepted a mug. On a mountain, open space can be where trouble leaves. He absorbed that. Ranger sat in the drift and immediately looked offended by the cold touching his hindquarters. Nathan pointed at him. Tactical error. Ranger stood and shook snow onto Nathan's boots. Claire smiled into her coffee. They spent the morning removing every 3rd willow strip from the tight section and changing the angle of the end posts. May marked snow deposits on a hand-drawn map. Pastor Daniel's volunteers returned with more willow. Ruth brought a pie and told everyone not to get sentimental because she had overbaked the crust. The refuge, for the first time in months, sounded less like survival and more like a place under construction. That did not mean the pressure lifted. Grant's 3rd letter came that afternoon, hand-delivered by the same clean truck. This one mentioned inspection community concern and the possibility of alternative use for the land if current operations proved unsustainable. Claire read it in the barn while Nathan tightened a brace. He watched her fold it. Say it, she said without looking up. I was not going to. You were thinking loudly. He set the wrench down. Men like that look for weak corners. Claire looked at the kennel fence where Ranger had found one. Then we do not leave him any. Nathan nodded. No dramatic vow, no threat, just a decision placed carefully beside hers. Outside snow kept falling, patient and thick, writing its white report across every post-gap drift and path. At dusk, Ranger rose from the porch and walked to the north fence. He sniffed once, then stared toward the road. The new motion light snapped on, throwing the yard into stark silver. No person stood there this time, only tire tracks at the edge of the plowed lane, slowing near the gate, then moving on. Claire watched them fill with snow. Nathan stood beside her, close but not touching. Ranger remained between them, the old dog reading the night as if it were a letter someone had tried to hide. The wind moved through the open willow, lost some of its force, and dropped its burden beyond the kennel instead of against it. Not perfect. Better. Claire tied one blue cord to the nearest post. Nathan held the lantern while she made the knot. When she finished, Ranger put his paw on the cord for 1 second, then removed it. May from the porch whispered, "Did he just approve it?" Nathan looked at the dog, then at the snow, then at Claire. I would call it provisional. The next snowstorm was not large enough to frighten the valley, which made it perfect for teaching the kind of lesson people resist until weather writes it in plain sight. It came after midnight, 5 steady hours of fine snow pushed by a northern wind, and by dawn the half-built windbreak at Whitaker Canine Refuge had become a diagram no person could argue with for long. Claire woke before the alarm as usual. Ranger was already sitting at the kitchen door, not asking out, simply making it known that the outside world had submitted paperwork. Nathan slept in the storage room with his bedroll squared against the wall, and one hand resting where Ranger's collar would be if the dog had chosen to sleep beside him. He had not. Ranger had spent the night across the threshold, distributing loyalty in a way that blocked everyone equally. Claire stepped over him, put on coffee, and opened the back door. Cold came in with a clean bite. The yard lay blue in the early light, all hard shadow and silver snow. At first the windbreak looked successful. The kennel wall was clear, the lower vents breathed. No drift had sealed the main door. Then Claire walked the line and saw the problem at the far end. The section Nathan had woven tighter than the others had caught the wind like a hand catching cloth. Snow had curled behind it, built a crescent, and sent a tongue of drift toward the gate. Not disaster, not even close. But winter rarely began with disaster. Winter began with a detail that people ignored because they were tired. Claire planted a blue-topped stake in the highest part of the drift, another where the snow thinned, another where bare ground showed unexpectedly on the windward side. Nathan came out with 2 mugs of coffee and Ranger beside him. He took in the stakes, the curve, the tight weave, and the gate. His face did not change much, but Claire had learned his silences had different weights. This one was the weight of a man meeting evidence. I made a wall, he said. You made a very disciplined wall. That sounds like mercy before criticism. It is coffee before criticism. He handed her a mug. The steam warmed her face. Ranger walked into the crescent drift, sank to his chest, and stared at Nathan as if personally disappointed. Nathan pointed at him. You agreed with the placement. Ranger climbed out with effort and shook snow across both humans. Claire laughed before she could stop herself. Nathan looked at her over the rim of his cup. It is possible he only agreed with lying down. Most committees function that way. The joke was quiet and odd. It was also his. Claire found herself storing it with the other things she had not asked to collect, the way he put tools back, the way he announced every loud noise before making it near the dogs, the way Ranger leaned into his knee when the wind hit metal. They began removing willow strips after breakfast. May arrived wrapped in 2 scarves and carrying a notebook where she had drawn the windbreak from above. Her map had arrows, measurements, and a small sketch of Ranger labeled Inspector, which Claire pretended not to admire. May was less timid around the dogs now, though she still moved carefully. Fear, when respected, had become attention. She walked with Ranger along the open section and watched how snow had fallen in soft ribs away from the kennel. It is like the wind tripped, she said. Claire nodded. That is close. May wrote it down. Nathan read over her shoulder. Wind tripped. More scientific than my version. Your version was wrong, Claire said. It had excellent posture. Ranger sneezed. May laughed openly. The sound carried across the yard and startled Molly into barking. 2 weeks earlier, May would have dropped whatever she held. Now she looked toward the kennel, saw Molly's tail wagging, and said, Drama queen. The words came out affectionate. Claire marked a moment without comment. Blue cords were not only for wood and metal. Sometimes a person tied one in memory. Ruth arrived near noon in boots that had seen better decades and a coat that smelled faintly of fryer oil and cinnamon. Pastor Daniel followed with 3 volunteers, 2 teenagers, and a thermos whose contents could remove paint.
Nobody asked Claire if she needed help. They had learned, or Ruth had threatened them. They simply took assignments. Claire put them to work spacing willow slats, moving snow, clearing the vents, and hauling gravel to the low wet patch beside the pump house. Nathan worked beside Owen Marks, who had come off shift with dark circles under his eyes and a box of old county file folders. Grant Voss had moved from letters to calls. He had requested information about zoning, animal shelter compliance, and whether the refuge's winter access met emergency standards. Owen said all this quietly while driving a post.
Claire listened with a shovel in hand. Paper storms had their own temperature. They made the air taste metallic. Grant cannot prove neglect if the records show care, Owen said. Your logs are good. Your repairs are documented. The photos may took help. Claire looked at the half-open windbreak, the volunteers in mismatched gloves, the dogs warm inside, and the old house with smoke rising from the chimney. It still looked messy. Real care often did. Grant would photograph the mud, the patched boards, the tired paint, and the scraped-together solutions. He would not photograph the midnight pump repair, Pearl breathing easier, Echo eating after his medicine, May standing in a kennel without fear. He would not photograph the difference between worn and abandoned because his profit depended on calling them the same thing. Nathan seemed to follow her thoughts. He tamped gravel around a post and said, "We build the record like we build this, open enough for truth to pass through." Claire glanced at him. "That is almost poetic. I apologize." "You should." Ranger carried a dropped glove from one volunteer to another until the entire crew understood that leaving gear on the ground resulted in public correction. The teenagers adored him. Ranger tolerated that, then stole one boy's hat and placed it beside Nathan's boot with judicial calm. By afternoon, the windbreak had changed shape. The tight sections opened, the far end angled away from the gate. The center remained strong but porous willow strips woven with spaces that made Nathan uneasy less loudly than before. Claire tied blue cords to the posts that held true. May asked if she could tie one. Claire handed her a strip. May chose the gate brace she had helped reset and knotted the cord carefully, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Her phone buzzed just as she finished. She looked at the screen and went pale. Claire noticed immediately. "My dad," May said. "He saw a picture Ruth posted of Ranger. He wants to know if he can come by sometime." Nathan stilled at the name Dad in a way small enough to miss. Claire did not miss it. May's father, Tom Harper, had been a Marine once, Ruth had said. Since returning home, he had become a man who loved his daughter badly, not because love was absent, but because fear had taken too many rooms in him. May stared at the message. "I do not know what to say." Claire took off one glove to retie a loose cord. "Say one true thing." May swallowed. She typed slowly. "Maybe next week." Then she added, "If you can be calm around the dogs." She looked horrified after sending it. That was mean. Nathan shook his head. "It was clear. There is a difference." May looked at him, surprised by the gentleness. Ranger leaned briefly against her knee and then walked away as if emotional support was best delivered without making eye contact. By dusk, the snow had begun again, powdery and soft. Grant Voss arrived in a black SUV that looked offended by the driveway. He stepped out in a wool coat too clean for the yard and boots chosen by someone who had seen snow mostly through windows. Claire met him by the gate before he could wander near the kennel. Nathan stayed back because Claire had told him to and because Ranger had planted himself in front of Nathan's knees as if holding him by invisible leash. Grant smiled with a mouth that had never done a chore. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "I hope to catch you during daylight." "You did." His gaze slid past her to the volunteers, the exposed posts, the patched kennel, the open yard full of trampled snow. "I see there has been activity." "Work," Claire said. "We call it work here." "Of course," his smile tightened, "some concerned parties have raised questions about whether this property is suited to animal housing in severe conditions."
That is generous of them since the animals are currently warm. Grant looked toward Nathan. And your new hand, former patient, current worker, paid in board as logged.
Grant's eyes sharpened at the word logged. He had expected embarrassment, maybe defensiveness. Claire gave him paperwork instead, and men like Grant disliked paperwork that did not belong to them. "I admire your spirit," he said. Claire did not thank him. Admiration from a man trying to buy your weakness was just varnish on a hook. He continued, "My offer remains open. With the county review likely, you may find this is the right time to consider a graceful exit." Behind Claire, Ranger made a low sound. Not a growl exactly, more like thunder considering whether to become weather. Nathan touched 2 fingers to the dog's shoulder. Claire did not turn. "The right time to leave land is when you are done with it, Mr. Voss." "I am not done." He looked at the blue cords fluttering on the posts. "Sentimental repairs do not satisfy inspection standards." "No, but documented ones do." Claire pulled a folded copy of the day's work log from her coat pocket. Because Ruth had insisted she carry duplicates, and Claire had mocked her until this precise, blessed second. "I will provide records when the county asks. Until then, you are standing in the way of a gate that needs closing." Grant's smile disappeared for half a breath. Then it returned, thinner. "Weather changes quickly here." "It does, that is why we are working." He left soon after, tire spinning once before catching. Nobody cheered. Claire would have hated that. Instead, Ruth handed her a sandwich. Pastor Daniel said nothing, only touched the top rail of the new windbreak and bowed his head for a prayer so short it barely disturbed the air. "Lord, keep what is living warm and make our hands useful. Amen." Claire could accept that kind of prayer. It had work boots on. Night settled. The volunteers went home. May stayed to finish bedding the dogs and sent one more message to her father. Nathan cleaned tools in the barn, returning each to Frank's bench with care. Claire stood beside the windbreak and watched snow move through the open willow. It did not stop. It never would. It crossed the yard but slowed and dropped its burden in the place she had marked away from the kennel door. Nathan came to stand beside her. "You were right," he said. She looked at him. "I know," he nodded. "I am learning not to resent that." The honesty warmed her more than praise. They stood in companionable cold, while Ranger lay between them, paws crossed, eyes half closed. Then the motion light snapped on near the north road. All 3 turned. A county truck appeared first, then Owen stepping out fast, hat in hand. He did not look like a man bringing casual news. Claire walked to meet him, snow crunching under her boots. Owen's face was grim but controlled. "Grant filed the formal complaint," he said. "Inspection in 10 days, maybe sooner if weather allows." Claire let the words settle. Behind her, the wind passed through the willow and spent itself in the open yard. She looked at the kennel, the blue cords, the house, Nathan, May in the doorway, Ranger rising slowly from the snow. 10 days, she said. Then we use all 10. The 10 days before inspection did not pass so much as grind. Snow fell in layers, sometimes soft as sifted flour, sometimes hard enough to sting the skin between scarf and hat, and every layer added another task to the list Claire kept folded in her coat pocket. Clear the kennel vents, photograph the clear vents, check the pump, log the pump pressure, label medications, update feeding charts, reset the windbreak stakes, call the county office, leave a message, call again, smile with her voice when nobody answered. Do not throw the phone into a snowbank, because phones were expensive and snowbanks already had enough secrets. Nathan built shelves in the storage room so supplies no longer sat directly on the cold floor. May scanned receipts at Ruth's diner because the refuge internet behaved like a shy animal that fled when needed. Ruth organized a meal train without calling it charity, which was wise of her. Pastor Daniel found 2 retired carpenters willing to fix the kennel roof edge for the cost of coffee and the right to complain about modern screws.
Deputy Owen checked the North Road each evening and pretended it was on his route. The refuge became busy in a way that should have comforted Claire. Instead, it made the danger feel more public. Private struggle had edges she understood. Public concern grew legs and walked into town. By the third day, people in Stanley had begun arranging the story without asking the people living inside it. Some said Claire had taken in a wounded veteran and was being rewarded for kindness. Some said she had let a strange man sleep on the property and now the county was involved. Some said Grant Voss would turn the land into cabins with heated floors and a view, as if heated floors could forgive what they replaced. Ruth reported the rumors over breakfast with the expression of a woman delivering weather she planned to fight personally.
I told Arlene Pike that if she wanted to inspect virtue, she could begin with her own pie crust, Ruth said. Claire rubbed both hands over her face.
Please stop defending me in bakery metaphors. I will not. Nathan sat at the end of the table, coffee untouched, Ranger lying across his boots. He had heard enough. Claire could tell by the way his face had gone still. Former soldiers were not the only people who did that. Anyone who had survived judgment learned the art of making a calm surface over deep water. May looked from Nathan to Claire and lowered her eyes to the receipt scanner as if it might offer sanctuary. Ruth, who missed nothing except stop signs when motivated, softened her tone. Talk is talk, work is work. We know which one keeps dogs warm. Claire nodded, but talk had teeth when money stood behind it. Later that morning, Grant's attorney sent a letter requesting documentation of shelter capacity, volunteer training, emergency access, waste management,
and proof that all resident animals were legally held and appropriately housed. The words were not cruel. That was what made them effective. Cruelty could be dismissed. Concern dressed in legal language had to be answered line by line. Claire sat at the kitchen table with the letter, Frank's old files, and a headache blooming behind her eyes. Nathan stood by the stove, not hovering exactly, but failing to be elsewhere. Ranger lay under the table with his head on Claire's boot. She had not invited him. He had decided her pulse needed supervision. You can leave the room if you want to pace holes in something, she told Nathan. I am not pacing. Your shoulders are pacing. He looked at his own shoulders as if they had betrayed him. Grant is using my being here. Claire kept reading. Grant is using whatever he can reach. That includes me. That includes the patched roof, the tax bill, the fact that you are a woman running land he wants, the fact that old dogs look old, and probably the weather, if you can get it notarized. Nathan did not smile. I can go. The words entered the kitchen softly, but everything in Claire heard them strike. May froze in the pantry doorway. Ruth, who had been washing cups, turned off the faucet. Ranger lifted his head. Nathan looked at Claire, and the tiredness in him was not physical now. If me staying makes this harder, I can take Ranger and move to Owen's place or the motel. I can keep working during the day. I do not want to be the thing that costs you the refuge. Claire set the letter down carefully, because paper deserved no blame for carrying cowardly sentences. Part of her understood the offer. Part of her admired it. The rest of her wanted to throw him into the snow and make him come back through the gate properly. She stood and walked to the window above the sink. Outside, the windbreak crossed the yard in an unfinished line of willow and blue knots. Snow moved through it, so fell away from the kennel. May's truck sat crooked by the barn. The bay mare Nathan still refused to call a gift chewed hay beside Juniper. Ranger's prints stitched paths between house kennel and fence. The refuge no longer looked like it had been saved by anyone. It looked like many hands had decided it was worth saving. All winter, Claire had told herself she could do everything alone if she had to. That was true. It was also no longer the question. Do you want to leave? She asked without turning. No. The answer came too fast to be polite. Claire closed her eyes. Good. Ruth made a small sound that might have been victory but disguised itself as a cough. Claire turned back. I do not want you gone. Nathan did not move. She added, do not make me say it twice in front of witnesses. May looked at the floor. Ruth looked at the ceiling with the expression of a woman giving heaven credit for excellent timing. Ranger stood, walked to Nathan, and placed one of Nathan's gloves on top of his boot. Nathan stared down at it. Claire said, even your dog thinks you are trying to misplace yourself. That did it. Not laughter, not yet, but the room loosened. Nathan picked up the glove, then looked at Claire with something open and careful in his face. If I stay with clear terms. Board labor records, separate quarters. Claire lifted the attorney's letter. Already logged. Separate quarters, Ruth repeated. At your age, I should hope you know how doors work. Claire pointed at her. Do not help. I am excellent help. Nathan's ears turned faintly red, which Claire enjoyed more than was generous. The decision did not fix the inspection. It fixed the room. Work resumed with a different kind of steadiness. Nathan moved his bedroll from the temporary storage corner to the small bunk room off the mudroom, a space Frank had once used for volunteers during search season. He did not unpack completely at first. His duffel stayed half-zipped. His spare shirt remained rolled tight. Ranger noticed. Of course, Ranger noticed. That evening, while Claire updated the animal records, Ranger dragged the duffel by one strap into the kitchen and dropped it beside Nathan's chair. Nathan looked at the dog. That is unnecessary. Ranger sat. May, who had come in with clean towels, whispered, he is asking for emotional accountability. Nathan looked at Claire. Has she been like this long? Since she learned you do not bite. May grinned, then lost the grin when her phone rang. She stepped into the mudroom, spoke quietly, and returned with red eyes. My dad wants to come tomorrow, she said. He says he can help with drainage if you need it. Then smaller. He also asked if Ranger is friendly. Nathan considered the question with grave seriousness. Ranger is fair. May nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. Tom Harper arrived the next afternoon in a green truck with a cracked windshield and a toolbox organized by a man trying to keep disorder out of at least one part of life. He was in his late 50s, broad-bearded and careful with his eyes. He did not look at May too long, perhaps afraid she would see how badly he wanted to. May stood beside Claire, hands buried in her coat pockets. Ranger walked to Tom first. The yard held still. Tom did not reach down. He let the dog circle, sniff, decide. Ranger stopped in front of him and looked up. Tom swallowed. You are an old soldier too, huh? Ranger sneezed on his boot. Nathan murmured, high honor. Tom gave a nervous laugh that turned into a cough. He and May spent the day clearing the low ground near the pump house, barely speaking at first. Then Tom asked where she wanted gravel. May answered. Later, she corrected the slope he cut. He accepted the correction. Claire, watching from the kennel, understood that some repairs began underground before anyone saw water move differently. Nathan worked on the windbreak, but his attention kept drifting toward the road. Grant did not come that day. Neither did another letter. Absence had its own pressure. By evening, the refuge had new drainage gravel, updated charts labeled, medicine shelves, a volunteer sign-in sheet, and a bunk room where Nathan's spare shirt finally lay folded in Frank's old cedar chest. Claire saw him place it there. He saw her see. Neither spoke. Not everything needed words immediately. Night brought a hard wind and a metallic clatter from the barn roof where a loose strip of flashing snapped against a beam. Nathan was out of bed before Thought Body pulled into an old alertness that did not know Idaho from memory. Ranger rose with him, pressing against his leg. Claire reached the mudroom at the same time, lantern in hand. Nathan stood rigid, breath fast, one palm flat against the wall. Outside, the flashing hit again. Bang, bang, bang! May appeared behind Claire, frightened by Nathan's stillness more than by the sound. Claire remembered her own rule. If you have a bad night, You say so before you walk into the storm. Nathan's jaw tightened. Bad night, he said. 2 words, rough as bark, more than he had given the fear before. Claire nodded as if he had reported a weather condition. Thank you. She turned to May. Stay with the dogs. To Nathan, she said, count Ranger's breathing, then mine if that gets boring. His eyes flicked to hers. That almost smile came and went. Ranger breathed heavily, perhaps on purpose, old ribs rising and falling like a bellows. Nathan put his hand on the dog's back. 1, 2, 3, the flashing banged again. His hand trembled, but he stayed. Claire waited until his breathing matched the dog's, then opened the door. We fixed the noise, she said. Together. He swallowed. Together. Outside, snow sliced across the yard. The flashing had come loose, but not far. Claire held the ladder while Nathan from the ground passed tools up to Tom Harper, who had slept in his truck rather than drive the icy road home. No heroics, no rooftop drama. Just 3 tired people, 1 worried daughter, 1 old dog, and a strip of metal made quiet with screws and stubbornness. When they returned inside, Ruth, who had somehow appeared with Coco despite the hour, looked at Nathan and said, You still with us, Nathan? Rubbed Ranger's head. More than I was. That was all. It was plenty. The next morning, the county inspector called. Weather permitting, she would arrive in 2 days. Claire wrote the time in the log. Nathan stood beside her shoulder, warm, near hers, but not touching. Ranger lay across the doorway with Nathan's glove and Claire's blue cord between his paws. Claire looked at the inspection list, then at the window where snow continued to fall over the yard they had not finished saving. 2 days, she said. Nathan nodded. Ranger sighed, bored by human deadlines. Outside, the wind moved through the willow and the refuge breathed. The inspector did not arrive in 2 days. The mountain made other plans. A storm rolled into the Sawtooth Valley before dawn on the 2nd day, first as a gray wall above the ridge, then as a full white shutting of the world. The county office called at 6:15 to postpone, and Claire felt relief for exactly 9 seconds before she saw what the wind was doing to the road. This was not the neat instructional snow that had tested the windbreak. This was old winter throwing its shoulder into the valley, driving snow low across the ground, piling it against anything foolish enough to stand solid. The refuge moved into storm rhythm without discussion. Claire checked the dogs and vents. Nathan cleared the water access and tied a rope from house to kennel, then from kennel to barn, then from barn to the first windbreak post. May filled extra buckets. Tom Harper started the generator and looked less like a guest than a man grateful to be given practical orders. Ruth, who had stayed overnight because the road had looked ugly, and she trusted ugly roads less than ugly gossip, made oatmeal in a pot large enough to feed a logging crew. Ranger inspected every movement, carrying 1 dropped glove, 1 roll of tape, and for reasons known only to him, a potato from Ruth's sack. Ruth took it back. Ranger stared at her. Not today, Sergeant. The storm swallowed daylight. By mid-morning, the house windows had turned into pale squares. Snow pressed against the lower barn door, but not the kennel entrance. Claire walked the windbreak line with Nathan. Both of them clipped to the rope, and felt a fierce, quiet satisfaction watching the open willow do its strange work. Snow loaded on the windward side broke through the gaps, dropped in long ridges away from the kennel, and left the approach passable. Not clear, passable. In winter, passable was a hymn. Nathan looked at the drifts and then at Claire. He did not say, "You were right this time." He had learned. He only said, "It is spending itself out there." Claire nodded. "That is the idea." Ranger pushed between them and shook snow from his coat onto their legs. "That is his idea," Nathan added, "obviously."
They returned to the house just as Deputy Owen's voice crackled through the radio, thin and broken. Claire turned the dial, caught fragments, lost them, caught them again. Vehicle off-road near Basin Cut, family of 3, 1 adult, 2 children, weather worsening, Owen attempting approach, signal unstable. The words rearranged the room. Ruth turned off the stove burner. May set down a bucket. Tom's hand closed around the back of a chair. Nathan's face became still, but this time it did not seal him away. Claire saw him choose the present. She stepped to the map pinned beside the pantry. Basin Cut was 3 miles below where the road curved under a slope that drifted badly when wind came from the north. Owen could reach them, maybe. Getting them back out would be harder.
The refuge was the nearest heated building, with supplies, animals used to noise, and people already awake. Claire lifted the radio. "Owen, this is Whitaker. Refuge is ready if you can bring them north." Static, then Owen clipped and faint. "May need sled assist. Road rough. Do not send untrained." Claire looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Ranger. Ranger was already standing. No one asked the dog if he wanted to go. Old working animals heard need in a room and considered consent obvious. Nathan clipped a reflective lead to Ranger's harness, the orange one he had repaired with webbing from the supplies he brought back. The old strap Claire had found in the storm had been sewn into the handle, not because it was strong enough to matter, but because memory sometimes needed to be carried where it could do useful work. Claire caught Nathan's eye. No heroics. He nodded. No wandering past the marked road. He nodded again. "If you scare me, I will let Ruth pray at you for an hour." Nathan glanced at Ruth. "Ma'am, I will be careful." Ruth pointed a spoon at him. "That is the minimum, not a virtue." They did not take horses. The wind and visibility made that foolish. They took the rescue sled Frank had built years earlier, a low plastic carrier with rails, blankets, heat packs, water, and a canvas cover. Tom and Nathan pulled. Claire navigated the rope line to the outer gate. Ranger moved ahead only as far as the lead allowed, nose low, choosing the packed places beneath loose snow. May stayed with Ruth at the refuge, a decision she hated and understood. Someone had to keep the dogs calm, water warm, and radio open. Claire saw May fighting the old child feeling of being left behind. She put a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "This is not lesser work. It is the work that lets other work happen." May nodded, eyes bright, and took the radio from Ruth with both hands. Outside the gate, the road had nearly vanished. Snow moved sideways at knee height. Trees appeared and disappeared like thoughts. Nathan kept his breathing steady, one hand occasionally brushing Ranger's back. Claire watched him for signs of slipping away into whatever storm lived inside him. He stayed with the dog, with the sled, with the rope in Tom's hands. Once a gust hit a road sign and made it clang sharply. Nathan flinched hard. Ranger stopped, leaned against his leg, and waited. Claire did not speak. She counted breaths silently until Nathan moved again. That was what courage looked like here. Not the absence of fear, not a dramatic charge into danger, but a man choosing one more step with his hand on a dog's warm back. They found Owen 1/2 mile below the refuge, guiding a mother and 2 children along the buried road. The family's vehicle was out of sight behind the blowing snow. Claire did not ask for details. The children needed warmth, not a story. The mother kept apologizing with blue lips and a voice scraped thin by fear. Claire wrapped a blanket around the younger child and said, "You are here now. That is the only sentence we need." Nathan helped settle the older child on the sled beside the supplies. Ranger stood close, calm and solid, letting the child bury mittened fingers in his thick fur. The dog's steadiness did what adult reassurance could not. The mother focused on Ranger and breathed. Owen looked at Claire with the grim gratitude of a man whose backup had arrived wearing mismatched gloves and stubbornness. Road is closing behind us, he said.
Then we do not discuss it, Claire answered. We walk. The trip back took longer than the trip out. Wind filled their tracks almost as soon as they made them. Tom pulled until his shoulders shook, then Nathan took more of the weight, then Owen, then Tom again. Claire walked beside the mother, speaking in practical fragments. Step here, hold my sleeve, look at the light. Good. Again. Ranger moved between sled and road edge,
redirecting twice when the surface dipped where drainage had cut under the snow. No drama, no barking, just work. At the gate, the windbreak came into view like a dark, broken line. Beyond it, the yard was not clear, but it was usable. The kennel door opened, the barn door opened, the house light burned. May stood on the porch with Ruth behind her, both of them waving like lighthouse keepers who had run out of dignity and chosen love instead. Inside, the kitchen became a place of thawing hands, blankets, steam, and quiet instructions. Ruth took over food with the authority of a general. May hands, trembling only a little, helped the children out of wet layers and into spare sweatshirts from the donation bin. Claire checked the mother without fuss, watched color return to the children's faces, and let Owen use the radio. Nathan stayed near the mudroom with Ranger, removing the dog's harness, wiping snow from his paws, and checking the stiff hip that Cold always found. The older child, a boy of perhaps 7, peered around a blanket. Is he a hero dog? Nathan looked at Ranger, who was chewing gently on Ruth's stolen dish towel. He is a retired professional with questionable habits. The boy considered this. That is better. Everyone laughed, softly, tiredly, exactly enough. The storm continued through afternoon. The family slept in the sitting room, the children tucked under quilts where Frank's search teams once slept after long nights. Claire looked at them and thought of how places remember their purpose even when people forget. Whitaker Canine Refuge had been built for animals, yes, but Frank had never understood rescue as a narrow word. If something living came to the door in weather, you opened the door. That was the rule. Near evening, Owen walked outside with Claire and Nathan to check the windbreak. The storm had piled a heavy drift beyond the willow line. The tight end they had corrected held less snow now. The open spaces had kept the kennel approach from sealing over. Owen paced the distance from windbreak to kennel wall, boots sinking. 27 feet, he said. Claire tucked cold hands under her arms. Near enough. He looked at Nathan. Your idea? Nathan shook his head. Hers, I argued. Owen looked pleased by that. Arguing and then changing your mind is a disappearing skill. Ranger, who had followed despite being told to rest, sat beside Claire and placed one paw on a blue cord tied to the nearest post. Owen laughed. I see the inspector has already weighed in. The humor faded when they reached the pump house. One access lid had frozen along the edge. Nathan knelt, used a wooden wedge and slow pressure, and freed it without cracking the cover. Water still moved beneath, thin but steady. Claire felt relief travel through her body so sharply she had to look away. It was not perfect. Nothing was perfect. One windbreak section needed retying. A drift had formed near the barn corner. The pump housing needed another layer. But the system worked well enough to keep doors open, dogs warm, and water moving while the valley tested it. That was the kind of miracle she believed in. Not the kind that removed all trouble, but the kind that left you with one clear path through it. After dark, the mother woke and cried quietly into Ruth's shoulder. Ruth held her without commentary, which proved she could perform miracles too. The children fed Molly pieces of approved biscuit under May's stern supervision. Tom Harper watched his daughter manage frightened people and old dogs with a tenderness that seemed to surprise him. Later, he stood beside her at the sink. I did not know you could do all this, he said. May kept washing cups. I learned some here. He nodded. I am sorry I made you learn some of it at home.
The cup in May's hand stopped moving. Claire, passing through with towels, pretended not to hear because some repairs deserved a closed door even in a busy kitchen.
Nathan heard too. He looked down at Ranger, and Ranger leaned against his leg until the moment passed. The storm weakened near midnight. Owen decided nobody would travel until morning. Bedrolls spread across floors. The refuge dogs settled, offended by the overcrowding, but pleased by the biscuit economy. Claire stepped onto the porch for one breath of cold air. Nathan joined her, Ranger between them. Snow still fell, lighter now, silver in the porch lamp. The windbreak stood in the yard, uneven, blue-knotted, alive with purpose. "You did this," Nathan said. Claire watched May through the window, laughing quietly as one child showed her how Molly had stolen a sock. "We did." Nathan accepted the correction. Then, from the old storage shed beyond the barn came a muffled scrape. Ranger's head snapped toward it. His body went still, nose lifted, ears forward. Claire felt the night tighten again. Nathan reached for the lantern by the door. Not fear this time, readiness. Ranger stepped off the porch and moved toward Frank's old shed, as if following a scent that had waited all winter to be found. Frank Whitaker's old storage shed had always sounded alive in winter. Boards shrank, nails complained, snow slid from the roof in soft, sudden sighs. Mice, despite Claire's best negotiations, treated the place as a seasonal conference center. So when Ranger led them toward it after midnight, Claire told herself the scrape could be ordinary. Her body did not believe her. Nathan carried the lantern. Claire carried the ring of shed keys. Ranger walked ahead through the new snow, not rushing, not barking, following a scent with the steady certainty that made every human behind him feel both useful and unnecessary. The storm had weakened to a fine fall, the kind that laid silver on shoulders and made the dark seem gentle. Nothing about Ranger was gentle. He stopped at the shed door, sniffed the lower seam, then looked back at Claire. "Permission," Nathan said softly. Claire found the right key by feel. Frank had labeled them once, but the tags had worn blank years ago. The lock resisted, then turned with a reluctant click. Inside, the shed smelled of dust, old rope machine oil, and the dry cedar shavings her father used to scatter because he claimed mice had poor taste in housing. Ranger went straight to the back wall, where a workbench leaned under boxes of search gear, cracked snowshoes, broken handles, kept for reasons only Frank understood, and a faded orange rescue vest from a dog long gone. He pawed once at the floor beneath the bench. Claire crouched beside him. The boards there had warped slightly, one edge lifted by damp. Nathan set the lantern down and held back, letting this be her space. That small restraint nearly undid her more than intrusion would have. She pried up the loose board with a flat tool and found a shallow cavity lined with oilcloth. Inside sat a metal box, dull with age, its lid sealed but not locked. For a moment, Claire could not touch it. Frank had hidden very few things. He had been a man of open shelves, labeled, jars, and opinions delivered before breakfast. A secret box felt almost rude. Ranger nudged it with his nose. Claire exhaled. Fine. Bossy dog. She lifted the box out. Back in the kitchen, the rescued family slept in the sitting room. Ruth snored softly in a chair she would deny using. May and Tom had taken blankets near the kennel door, and Owen sat awake by the radio because lawmen and old grief kept similar hours. Claire placed the box on the table. Nathan stood at the stove, Ranger between them, the lantern light turning the room amber. Inside the box were folded maps, receipts, a notebook wrapped in wax paper, 2 photographs, and an envelope with Claire's name written in Frank's square hand. Her throat closed so suddenly, she had to put both palms flat on the table. Nathan looked away. Owen, from across the room, quietly stood and went to check the porch, giving her privacy without making a ceremony of it. Claire hated and loved them both for knowing. She opened the notebook first because the letter was too alive. Frank's notes filled the pages. Snow direction by date. Wind speeds copied from the radio sketches of the kennel yard. Drainage problems near the pump house. A proposed windbreak line 27 feet from the west wall. Alternative angles, costs, materials, names of volunteers who might help, and a title underlined twice. Whitaker, Canine Refuge, Winter Conversion Plan. Claire stared. The words blurred. Nathan came closer. Only when she pushed the notebook toward him, he studied the sketches. He had the decency not to say that Frank had planned the same thing she had been building. Instead, he said, he trusted the snow. Claire laughed once, but it broke in the middle. He trusted being right. The envelope waited. Ranger rested his chin on Claire's knee. She opened the letter. Frank's voice rose from the page without sound, practical and tender and irritatingly sure. He wrote that if she had found the box,
either he had forgotten to show her, or the Lord had finally made use of his poor timing. He wrote that he had wanted to turn the refuge into a permanent winter haven for retired canines and search dogs whose bodies carried more service than comfort. He wrote that he had not told Claire because he wanted the grant application approved first, wanted to give her a finished thing instead of one more burden. Then the line that took her breath. You understand this place better than I ever did. Even when you are angry at it. If I leave before saying so, forgive an old fool who thought he had more mornings. Claire did not cry loudly. She did not fold into anyone's arms. She sat very still while tears ran down her face and dropped onto the paper her father had kept dry through 2 winters. Nathan stood across from her, eyes lowered, one hand on Ranger's back. The whole kitchen held its breath around grief, not trying to fix it. That was mercy. Finally, Claire wiped her face with her sleeve and said,
He hid a grant plan under mouse territory. Nathan's mouth tightened. Strategic, terrible. Both can be true. Ruth, awake now because nothing emotional happened within 10 yards of her without detection, shuffled into the kitchen, wrapped in a quilt. She saw the letter, the maps, Claire's face, and said nothing for once. She only put water on for coffee. Pastor Daniel would have called that discernment. Claire would have called it a rare medical event. By morning, the metal box had changed the refuge's future from a wish into evidence. Frank had listed non-profit contacts, old donors from search and rescue days, cost estimates, and a drainage plan that made Claire wince because it proved the pump house problem was larger than she wanted. The low ground did not merely freeze. It collected meltwater, soaked the bedding around the water line, then locked it in place when temperatures fell. Their emergency fixes had helped, but spring thaw would turn the area soft unless they cut a bypass channel and raised the access covers. Better April than January, Frank had written in the margin. Claire touched the sentence. It sounded like him, and like Nathan, and like every practical mercy she had ever resented until it saved her. The inspection delay became a gift. The storm left the road closed for another day, which meant Grant could not bring anyone in, and the refuge crew could work without audience. Claire, Nathan, Tom, and Owen opened the ground near the pump house where snow had thinned. They did not dig wildly. They followed Frank's map, cut a shallow channel to guide runoff away, laid gravel beneath the low section, and reset 2 access lids so they could be opened without tearing up frozen earth. The work was wet, cold, and deeply unglamorous. Claire hated doing twice what winter had already forced her to do once. Nathan, tamping gravel beside her, said, "Better now than during the inspection." Claire glared at him.
"Do not quote my dead father unless you are ready for consequences." "I was quoting the margin. That is worse." Ranger chose that moment to drop a muddy stick on Nathan's boot. Claire laughed. It escaped before she could approve it. Nathan looked up, and the expression on his face made the cold day warmer in a way she had no ledger column for. It was not triumph. It was gratitude at hearing a sound he had not earned but had been allowed to witness. Tom Harper worked quietly, shoulders hunched against more than weather. May handed him tools and corrected slope with increasing confidence. At one point, Tom set a pipe section in place and May said, "It needs a 1/4 inch more fall." He started to say something automatic, then stopped. He looked measured and adjusted it. "You are right." May blinked. Claire saw the impact of those 3 words move through her like thaw. Later, while they warmed hands in the barn,
Tom told Nathan he had not known how to talk to his daughter after coming home from his own service years earlier. Every room felt too loud, he said. Every question felt like a trap. Nathan leaned against a stall door, Ranger at his feet. "I made silence feel safer than love," Tom continued. "That is hard to undo." Nathan looked toward the house where Claire was laying Frank's maps flat under cookbooks. "Hard does not mean late," Tom nodded, eyes wet but steady. Ranger stood stretched and deliberately placed himself between the 2 men until both had to step around him to continue pretending the conversation was casual. The dog had no patience for pride arranged as distance. That evening, when the family rescued from Basin Cut had been safely collected by relatives and the refuge quieted, Nathan found Claire in the shed with Frank's letter folded beside her. She was sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at the place the box had been hidden. He did not enter fully. "Need anything?" She shook her head, then changed her mind. "Tell me about the dog before, Ranger." Nathan's hand tightened around the doorframe. Claire almost took it back. He stepped inside. "Bishop," he said after a long pause. "Black and tan shepherd, too smart, terrible breath, believed all socks were contraband." Claire smiled faintly. "Qualified officer, absolutely." Nathan sat on a crate across from her. He told the story carefully, not with details that would turn pain into spectacle, but with the shape of what mattered. A mission overseas, confusion, a moment when Bishop responded faster than any human could. The dog saved lives and did not come home the way Nathan had prayed he would. Afterward, people called Nathan lucky. He had hated the word. Lucky felt like theft when someone loyal was gone. He left the teams later, not in disgrace, not in glory, but because the part of him that could keep moving without feeling had finally run out of road. Ranger came after. Not as replacement, because no living creature deserved to be made into a memorial, but as a partner during the years when Nathan still had work and did not yet have a life. Then Ranger was transferred, retired, misplaced by paperwork and human busyness, and Nathan had told himself he would find him tomorrow until tomorrow became winter. Claire listened without interrupting. The shed roof ticked as snow melted and refroze. When Nathan finished, Ranger pushed the door open with his nose and entered carrying May's missing scarf. He dropped it in Nathan's lap. Nathan looked at him. "That is not mine." Ranger stared. Claire said, "He may be broadening your accountability." Nathan rubbed the dog's ears. "Bishop would have liked you." Ranger sneezed. "Or not." That night, Nathan unpacked the last of his duffel into the cedar chest in the bunk room. Claire saw the empty bag folded beside the wall when she passed with towels. She did not comment. Instead, she went to the kitchen table and added a new page to the inspection binder: Frank's winter conversion plan, current repairs, volunteer labor, drainage updates, windbreak test photographs, animal care logs, emergency rescue report. Paperwork beats paperwork. Records beat rumors. Work beats photographs taken from the worst angle. The words had become a kind of litany. Outside, snow slid from the roof in soft thuds. Ranger slept with his back against the kitchen door. May and Tom sat at the table after supper, not reconciled in any shining way, but discussing whether he might come twice a week to help with heavy repairs. Ruth watched them while pretending to mend a towel. Nathan stood beside Claire at the counter, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He looked at Frank's maps. "Your father was building something bigger than a shelter." Claire traced the line of the planned windbreak with one finger. "He was building it and waiting to tell me until it looked presentable." He had poor manners for a visionary. Nathan's voice softened. Runs in the family. Claire elbowed him lightly without thinking. He smiled. The easy movement startled them both more than the joke. Before either could decide what to do with it, headlights swept across the window. Ranger rose. Owen, who had returned after taking the rescued family home, stepped onto the porch with snow on his hat and urgency in his face. Behind his truck was another vehicle, sleek and dark, its engine running. Grant Voss had come back, and this time he had brought the county inspector. Early, while the yard was half dug, the windbreak unfinished, and Frank's map still waited under cookbooks on the kitchen table. Grant Voss stepped from his dark vehicle as if the snow had been scheduled poorly on purpose. The woman who climbed out behind him did not share his irritation. She wore a county parka, rubber boots, and the expression of someone who had been underestimated often enough to find it useful. Her name was Evelyn Hart, and she introduced herself to Claire with a firm handshake, then looked past the house toward the kennel, the half-dug drainage channel, the open windbreak, the rescue sled, still drying under the porch roof, and Ranger standing in the doorway like a senior staff member withholding approval. "I understand the visit was expected tomorrow," Evelyn said. "Weather reports changed," Grant added smoothly. "Since the road was briefly passable, I thought it best that concerns be seen in current conditions." Claire felt Nathan shift beside her. Not forward, not much, but enough. Ranger leaned against his leg. Claire kept her eyes on Evelyn. "You are welcome to inspect current conditions." "I would have appreciated notice." Evelyn nodded. "That is fair. Mr. Voss informed my office he had coordinated with you." He had not. Grant's smile held. "I may have misunderstood." Ruth from inside the kitchen muttered something about snakes and hearing aids. Claire did not turn around. She had two choices: be angry in a way Grant could photograph, or be precise in a way Evelyn could record. Frank's letter lay on the table behind her. The blue cords moved in the wind outside. Nathan had once told her records beat rumors. She had believed it while holding a pen. Now she had to believe it while her land stood messy, wet, patched, and alive under inspection. "We keep an active binder," Claire said. "Animal logs, repair records, volunteer hours, emergency procedures, veterinary contacts, photos before and after storm, repairs. We also have a current drainage upgrade underway based on my father's winter conversion plan." Evelyn looked interested. Grant looked less so. "May I see the animals first?" Evelyn asked. Claire led the way. Nathan stayed half a step behind, not because she needed a guard, but because some people provide steadiness by refusing to take the front. Ranger walked beside him until they reached the kennel door, then moved ahead and sat near the threshold. Claire gave the dog a look. "I run tours." Ranger blinked. Evelyn smiled for the first time. "He seems to disagree." "He disagrees professionally." Inside, the kennel smelled of clean bedding, warm broth, disinfectant, and old dogs. Not fancy, not neglected. The difference mattered. Claire introduced each animal by name, history, care needs, and current condition. Echo, retired tracking hound. Arthritis managed with medication and heated bedding. Pearl, senior shepherd mix. Partial vision loss, calm, run assignment, low draft barrier. Molly, former evidence that joy and theft can share a body. Dietary restrictions, glove restrictions, unsuccessful. May stood near the supply shelf, holding the clipboard, nervous but ready. Evelyn asked questions. May answered two before Claire could, then blushed. Claire let her continue. Grant walked behind them with his phone held too casually, filming the patched walls, the old mats, the spots where boards did not match. Nathan noticed. Owen noticed. Evelyn noticed most of all. "Mr. Voss," she said without looking up from the feed chart documentation for county review, "should be gathered by authorized staff. Please put the phone away inside animal areas." Grant lowered it, smiled tight. "Of course." Ranger yawned.
Ruth would later describe this as divine commentary. At the northwest corner, Evelyn examined the repaired mesh and the new brace. Claire showed photographs from the night Ranger found the buried gap, the temporary repair, the permanent patch, and the added inspection schedule. Evelyn knelt to look at the lower vent, then at the burlap draft barrier inside. "You left upper ventilation open?" "Yes. Warmth without airflow traps moisture."
My father taught winter search sheltering. Evelyn glanced up. "Good," Grant said. "It still looks improvised." Claire turned. "Improvised is not the same as unsafe." Evelyn wrote that down, which pleased Claire more than it should have. They moved outside to the windbreak. Snow fell steadily, not enough to blind, enough to make every person aware that winter had not adjourned. Grant gestured toward the open willow. "This is one of my concerns. It is incomplete and frankly full of gaps." Nathan's mouth opened. Claire spoke first. "The gaps are intentional." She showed Evelyn the snow map May had made, the blue stakes marking drift lines, photos from before and after adjustments, and Frank's original sketch. "The structure is designed to slow and break the wind, not stop it. Solid barriers created drifts close to the kennel door during early tests. We opened the weave and changed the angle to drop snow away from access points." Evelyn walked the line. She pushed a boot into the drift beyond the willow, then paced toward the kennel wall where the path remained passable. 27 feet, she said. Claire nodded. "Near enough." Nathan looked down at Ranger, and Claire could feel him not smiling. Grant frowned. "It may function today, but a severe event could behave differently." "It already did," Owen said. He had been quiet until then, standing with his hat brim low and his notebook in hand. "During the Basin Cut rescue yesterday, this property maintained animal access, water access, and temporary human shelter in whiteout conditions. I filed the emergency report." Evelyn turned to him. "You brought evacuees here?" Owen corrected gently. "We brought neighbors here. The refuge was nearest and prepared." Claire felt that sentence settle over the yard like a warm coat. Grant did not. He shifted his weight. "Emergency use does not erase compliance concerns." "No," Evelyn said, "but it informs them." They moved to the pump house. The ground was ugly there, no avoiding it. Gravel piles, open-channeled damp earth access lids propped under canvas. Grant's face brightened in the way of men who mistake mess for proof. "This is what I mean. Exposed water infrastructure during freezing conditions, active excavation near animal housing, volunteer labor without contractor oversight." Claire handed Evelyn a laminated copy of Frank's drainage plan and current repair notes. The low section was trapping runoff under snow load. "We opened it during a storm window, laid gravel, raised access lids, and cut a bypass. Animals are kept clear. Water flow has been checked every 4 hours." Tom Harper, former combat engineer and current volunteer, supervised grade. Tom, standing beside May, looked startled at being dignified in public. May looked proud enough to light the yard. Evelyn reviewed the plan. "This is temporary until thaw. Temporary stabilization," Claire said. "Permanent work after ground softens." Grant interjected. With what funding? Claire had dreaded that question, because it was fair even from him. Before she could answer, Ruth appeared with a folder. It was bright red because Ruth believed subtle documents got ignored. "Pledges," Ruth said. "Local donors, church repair fund, diner jar. 3 retired handlers, 1 woman from Boise who saw May's post about Ranger and sent money with a note saying, 'Old dogs deserve warm feet.'" Claire stared at her. Ruth shrugged. "I did not call it charity. I called it invoices arriving early in heaven." Evelyn took the folder. Nathan leaned close enough to murmur, "Is she always this dangerous?" More. The inspection continued into the house. That part worried Claire in a different way. The house was clean but lived in. Frank's chair remained by the stove. Nathan's boots sat in the mudroom beside Ranger's towel.
The bunk room had his folded clothes in the cedar chest. Everything was logged as separate, but gossip did not need facts to grow.
Evelyn asked about staffing and housing.
Claire answered plainly Nathan had arrived as an emergency patient, returned as a board-for-labor worker with documented terms, slept in the volunteer bunk room, and helped with repairs. Ranger was his retired canine, not a shelter intake unless and until paperwork changed. Evelyn asked Nathan for confirmation. He gave it, then added, "Miss Whitaker has maintained boundaries more strictly than I have seen some officers maintain equipment logs." Claire looked at him. That was either the strangest compliment she had ever received or a cry for help. Evelyn wrote something down. Grant's expression suggested it had not helped him. In the kitchen, Evelyn examined the binder. May's records were tidy. Claire's notes were blunt. Nathan's repair logs were almost military in their precision. Ruth's pledge folder was chaotic but heartfelt, with checks, cash envelopes, and one napkin signed by 4 men who had apparently promised lumber.
Evelyn asked about emergency planning. Claire showed the rope routes, storm supplies, radio schedule, neighbor contact list, and dog evacuation chart. Pastor Daniel arrived halfway through with 2 more signed volunteer forms and tried to enter quietly, which failed because Molly saw him through the window and barked like announcing royalty. Grant sighed. Evelyn did not. She read the forms. "You have more community support than I expected from the complaint." Owen said the complaint and the community are not the same thing. That sentence should have ended the day. Winter, however, wanted one more demonstration. A heavy slide of snow came off the barn roof with a sound like a mattress dropped from heaven. Everyone turned. Outside, May had gone to retrieve a crate of clean towels from the barn porch. The snowslide did not hit her, but it startled the bay mare, who pulled back against the tie rail. The rail cracked, not breaking free, but shifting enough to send a stack of lightweight boards sliding from where volunteers had leaned them badly. It happened quickly and safely enough in outcome, but it could have become a mess. Ranger moved before any human. He ran to May, not barking, not leaping, just cutting between her and the sliding boards so sharply that May stepped back with him and avoided the path. Nathan followed, then stopped himself from rushing past the dog into chaos. Claire called instructions. Owen steadied the mare. Tom caught the loose boards. No one was hurt. The whole thing lasted perhaps 15 seconds. It revealed 3 months of work. May did not freeze. Nathan did not disappear into fear. Ranger did not wait to be told. Claire did not panic. The system held because the people inside it had practiced holding. Evelyn had seen all of it through the kitchen window. Grant had too. He looked disappointed in a way Claire found almost funny. Outside, May knelt beside Ranger and pressed her forehead briefly into his neck. "Thank you," she whispered. Ranger tolerated this, then stole her glove. Evelyn came to the porch and watched Claire retie the loose rail with a temporary strap, while Nathan checked the bay mare's calm, talking low, hands visible. Evelyn's voice was quiet. "This property needs work." Claire tightened the knot. "Yes. Some of it soon, yes." Evelyn looked at the windbreak, the pump house, the kennel, the people, the dog, now carrying May's glove like evidence. "I am not recommending closure." Grant turned. "Surely the documented concerns require more than good intentions." "They do." Evelyn faced him fully. "I am requiring a 30-day corrective plan. Complete the windbreak, finish temporary drainage stabilization, submit funding documentation, and schedule a spring infrastructure review. Based on what I have seen, the animals are being actively cared for. Emergency procedures are functional, and the facility has credible community support. Mr. Vaugh's future complaints should include direct evidence, not speculation." Ruth whispered amen with the precise volume of a person hoping to be heard. Claire stood still because relief, like grief, could knock a person down if it arrived too fast. Nathan stepped beside her but did not touch. Ranger brought May's glove to Claire and dropped it at her feet.
Apparently even triumph required filing. After Grant left, less graceful than he arrived, the yard did not erupt. People were too tired for celebration and too wise to trust a victory without work attached. Evelyn gave Claire the written notice, shook her hand, and said she would return after the 30 days unless weather forced delay. Owen drove her back to the main road. Ruth made coffee. Pastor Daniel offered a prayer of thanks that included the phrase "sturdy hinges and honest inspectors." May cried in the pantry for approximately 1 minute, then emerged insisting she had not.
Tom pretended to believe her. Nathan and Claire stood by the windbreak at dusk, reading the notice together. 30 days. Claire folded the paper. 48 hours until the next blizzard, Nathan said, looking at the ridge. Claire followed his gaze. The forecast had worsened. The coming storm was larger than the last, maybe the largest of the season, and the refuge still had unfinished drainage, loose rails, open supply stacks, and a windbreak that needed its final section. She should have felt defeated. Instead, she felt the strange steadiness of being told exactly where to put her hands. Ranger sat between them, snow collecting on his sable back. Claire tied a blue cord around the notice and tucked it into her coat pocket. Nathan watched. What does that knot mean? She looked toward the kennel where old dogs slept warm because imperfect things had held. It means we are not done. The wind rose along the ridge, carrying the first hard grains of the next storm. Nathan nodded. Then we work until it gets here. The final blizzard of that winter arrived with no interest in human deadlines. It came over the ridge before dawn lowered itself into the Sawtooth Valley and erased distance so completely that the barn became a rumor 20 steps from the house. Snow struck the windows in white waves. Wind pressed against the walls, not raging all at once, but testing, leaning, pausing, leaning harder, as if it had found the refuge on a map and meant to learn every weak place. Claire was awake before it hit. So was Nathan. So was Ranger, who had taken to sleeping across the kitchen threshold like a sandbag with opinions. May and Tom had stayed overnight after the inspection because the forecast had been ugly, and because neither of them had found the courage to leave while work still lay in visible piles. Ruth slept on the sitting room sofa, under 2 quilts, and woke complaining that nobody had invented a decent storm pillow. Pastor Daniel arrived at first light in his old truck, having driven the lower road before the worst of it closed, and brought 3 things: batteries, bread, and a willingness to be told what to do. Deputy Owen radioed from town that roads were closing fast, and no one should expect help unless life demanded it. Claire looked around the kitchen, at the faces turned toward her at Frank's map, spread under a sheet of clear plastic, at the inspection notice tied with blue cord, at Ranger sitting with one ear lifted. For months she had woken to a list too large for one woman. Now the list remained large, but it had names beside each line. Water, Nathan and Tom; kennel, vents and bedding, Claire and May; generator and lights, Pastor Daniel; food and warm drinks, Ruth, who accepted command of that kingdom as if born crowned; road and radio contact, Owen from town; Ranger himself, though nobody was foolish enough to write that down. They moved before the storm reached full force. The final windbreak section had gone up the night before, under work lights and falling snow, not pretty, not straight enough to please a carpenter, but tied with willow braced with cottonwood and opened in the places Claire had marked. Blue cords snapped along it like tiny flags. Nathan and Tom checked the pump access lids, cleared the bypass channel, and packed straw where cold wanted to settle. Claire and May moved the oldest dogs into the interior run, checked paws, warmed food, and hung low-draft cloths while leaving upper vents open. May handled Pearl alone, speaking softly as the old dog leaned against her knee. Claire watched without interrupting. Some confidence should not be startled by applause. By mid-morning the storm had taken the yard. The rope line between house, kennel barn, and windbreak became their road. Every trip outside required a hand on it, snow piled high against the windward side of the willow barrier, and then obedient to no person but shaped by many days of watching. Dropped beyond the kennel approach instead of sealing it. The gate remained usable. The barn door opened, the vents breathed, the pump water moved thinly under its lid. Nothing was easy. Easy was not the promise. Holding was the promise. Near noon, a willow lashing snapped near the far end with a crack swallowed quickly by wind. Nathan heard it and reached for his coat. Claire caught his sleeve. "Leave it." His eyes went toward the wall. "It will pull." "It is the far end, the rest is holding. Water first." He stood still, torn between the training that chased every breach and the mountain wisdom that ranked problems by consequence. Ranger pressed against his leg. Nathan looked at the dog, then back at the windbreak. "Water first," he repeated. The words sounded like a man laying down an old weapon. They went to the pump house, clipped to the rope, shoulders bent into snow. The access lid had frozen along one edge despite the straw. Nathan used a wooden wedge and patient pressure, not force. Tom shielded the lantern. Claire cleared snow from the outlet. For one breath too long, nothing happened. Then the lid gave. Beneath it, water moved narrow and dark and alive. Claire laughed into her scarf. Nathan leaned back on his heels, eyes closed for half a second. Tom slapped the pump housing as if congratulating a stubborn mule. Ranger, who had followed against orders, sniffed the water and looked unimpressed by the emotional response. On the way back, the wind hit the barn roof and a loose sheet of snow slid down with a heavy thud. Nathan flinched. Not a small flinch. His whole body locked, and the storm in his face was older than Idaho. Claire saw him start to leave the present. Ranger saw it sooner. The dog turned, shoved his shoulder against Nathan's knees, and stayed there. Claire stepped close enough that Nathan could hear her without shouting. "Bad night." For a second he could not answer. Snow scoured the air between them. Then he nodded once. "Bad minute." The honesty cut through the storm more cleanly than any rescue rope. Claire put one gloved hand over his where it gripped Ranger's harness. "Count him." Nathan's fingers tightened in the sable fur. "1," Ranger breathed. "2," Claire breathed with them. "3." Tom stood a few feet away, eyes lowered, giving dignity by pretending to inspect the rope knot. The wind slammed the barn again. Nathan stayed. 4, 5, 6. When his breathing steadied, he looked at Claire, and she saw exhaustion, embarrassment, and trust all fighting for space. She squeezed his hand once, then let go before the moment became too fragile to work inside. "Come on," she said. "Ruth will accuse us of freezing dramatically." Nathan managed, "That would be inefficient." Claire smiled into the storm. "Very." Inside, Ruth had cocoa ready and opinions about wet boots. May listened as Tom told her the drainage channel was working because of her quarter-inch correction. He said it in front of everyone. May looked down, smiling hard. Pastor Daniel changed batteries in the motion lights and prayed over the generator only after reading the manual, which Claire considered theologically sound. The afternoon darkened early. Snow climbed the windows. The dogs settled into storm sleep, that deep, practical rest animals take when warmth is real and humans have finally stopped fussing. Once Pearl whimpered until Ranger rose and lay outside her run. He did not press against the gate. He simply kept watch. Pearl slept. May sat on a feed bin nearby, eyes wet, and whispered to Claire, "I think I understand my dad more when I watch Ranger." Claire glanced at Tom, who was repairing a latch with Nathan. "Understanding is not the same as excusing," she said. "I know. It just makes the room bigger." Claire nodded. That was one of the better definitions of mercy she had heard. The worst of the blizzard came after sunset. The wind drove snow so hard that the porch light became a glowing blur. One of the motion lamps failed. The far willow lashing tore fully loose. The generator coughed twice and made everyone freeze before Pastor Daniel coaxed it steady. The storm did not admire their work. It tested it. Claire moved from task to task with a calm that felt borrowed from every person who had ever loved the place before her. Frank's map under plastic, Ruth's food on the stove, May's notes, Tom's corrected slope, Owen's radio reports, Nathan's repair logs, Ranger's tracks, blue cords whipping in the dark. At 9 o'clock, Owen's voice crackled through the radio reports of heavy drifting near Voss property, private crew stuck but safe, county advising shelter in place. Grant's name entered the kitchen and found no celebration waiting. Claire only asked if anyone needed refuge. Owen said no for now. Nathan watched her face. You would take him in? If he came to the gate in this weather, yes. Nathan nodded slowly. Ranger sighed from the doorway, as if the moral standards of humans were exhausting but acceptable. Near midnight, the wind began to lose its hard edge. Snow still fell, but the pressure changed. Claire felt it in the walls before she trusted her eyes. They went out together one more time. All of them clicked to the rope except Ruth, who declared she had already saved lives through Stu and would not ruin the record by falling in a drift. The windbreak stood. Not perfectly. One section sagged. The far end needed retying. Snow lay deep beyond it, exactly where it could be moved later instead of trapping animals now. The kennel approach was open. The barn door opened. The pump lid opened. The water moved. Claire stood in the yard with snow to her knees and looked at the refuge her father had left unfinished, the one she had nearly lost by trying to be strong in the loneliest possible way. The one now held together by willow records, stubborn women, tired men, old dogs, prayer laughter, and blue cords. Nathan came beside her. Ranger stood between them, his coat rimmed white, his amber eyes half closed against the wind. Claire did not feel triumphant. Triumph was too loud for that hour. She felt held. That was better. The 30-day corrective plan turned into 30 days of thaw, mudwork signatures, and small astonishments. Evelyn Hart returned twice, once with boots muddier than before, and once with approval papers in a folder. Claire carried around for half a day before setting it on the table. The refuge was not finished. It was certified to continue, which in practical terms meant still unfinished, but legally breathing. Ruth's diner jar became a proper fundraiser. Pastor Daniel's church hosted a work Saturday that involved more casseroles than structural engineering, but somehow produced both. Owen helped file the Winter Haven application Frank had begun. Tom came every week, and sometimes twice, and May no longer stood between him and the door when they talked. They did not become perfect. Better things happened. They became honest and useful pieces. Grant Voss's resort company withdrew its active complaint after Evelyn's report, and the county's emergency record made pressure look too much like pettiness. He did not apologize. Claire had not expected him to discover a new personality in spring. She accepted his absence as a functional substitute. Nathan stayed through the melt, then through the first repairs after melt, then through the day the bay mare finally named Mercy by Ruth without consulting anyone, herded 3 loose dogs back toward the kennel with the expression of a horse who had joined management. Claire told Nathan the mare had worked off her board and therefore belonged to the refuge. Nathan said that seemed fair. Ranger sneezed, perhaps approving, perhaps allergic to bureaucracy. One morning in late April, when snow still lay in dirty patches under the pines, but the creek had begun speaking loudly again, Nathan stood beside the east wall of the house, studying the ground below the window. Claire came out with coffee and found him holding Frank's old measuring tape. "That is dangerous," she said. He looked up. "Measuring men with measuring tape develop ideas. This one has a permit application." She handed him coffee.
He took it, then pointed with the cup toward the east wall. The volunteer bunk room works, but it stays cold. If the refuge is going to have winter staff, you need a proper addition. Mudroom extension, small room, better storage, separate exterior door. Practical. Very. He looked at the ground again, then at her. If I build it,
I would rather build it as someone staying by choice, not as a man paying off a debt. Claire felt the morning shift. The creak, the thaw, the dogs barking behind the kennel, Ruth's truck rattling somewhere on the road, Ranger lying on the porch with one eye open. Everything stayed ordinary. That was what made it holy. Nathan did not kneel. Claire would have disliked kneeling in mud. He did not make a speech large enough to scare the dogs. He simply stood there with coffee steaming in one hand and the measuring tape in the other, asking for a future in the language of square foundations and honest work. Claire looked at the east ground where morning sun reached first. You will set the sill level. His face changed. Slowly, carefully, like a man seeing a road open. Ranger lifted his head. Claire added, and Ranger inspects every board. Nathan's voice went rough. That sounds like yes. Claire sipped her coffee. It sounds like I have standards. He laughed then, fully enough that Molly barked from the kennel, and Ruth, arriving with a pie, shouted from the driveway that if people were getting engaged without her, she was adding a fee. They married in June at the small church in Stanley, with the doors open to mountain air and the refuge dogs represented by hair on everyone's clothing. Ruth cried and denied it. May stood with Claire Tom beside her, both of them holding hands without looking embarrassed. Owen signed as witness and later claimed Ranger had tried to sign too by placing a muddy paw on the register. Pastor Daniel kept the prayer short and useful. Lord, make this house warm, these hands patient, and this love sturdy in weather. Amen. By the next winter, the addition stood square on the east wall. 2 coats hung by the door, Nathan's gloves dried beneath Claire's blue cord. Frank's chair remained by the stove, not as an empty place now, but as a remembered one. Ranger slept where he pleased, which was usually wherever most inconvenienced foot traffic. Outside, snow fell thick over Whitaker Canine Refuge. The wind moved through the willow brake, lost its force, and laid its burden where the blue stakes said it should. Water still needed watching. Dogs still needed medicine. Bills still arrived with poor timing. Love did not make the work vanish. It changed the sound of it. Claire poured coffee into one mug, then another. This time she set the second on the table and left it there. Nathan came in from the kennel with snow on his shoulders and Ranger at his heels carrying a glove that did not need returning. Claire looked at the dog. You know he is standing right there. Ranger dropped the glove in the exact center of the room and lay down across the path. Nathan stepped over him and took the coffee. Outside, winter kept falling. Inside, nothing had to be empty to remember what had been lost. Some places survive because one person refuses to leave. Some survive because one by one the right souls come through the gate and are allowed to stay. Sometimes God does not answer a prayer by removing the storm. Sometimes he sends a rope line, an old dog with wise eyes, a neighbor with soup, a friend with a toolbox and enough light to see the next step. Claire and Nathan did not find healing in one grand miracle. They found it in daily mercy, opening the door, telling the truth, accepting help, doing the next repair, and choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen and remember someone in your life who may be facing a winter no one else can see. Share this with a friend or family member who needs hope today, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, loyalty, and love. May your home be warm, your hands be useful, and your heart brave enough to receive the help God sends.